Good evening, it's 7 p.m. Good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting of Burnside Council. Please stand for the acknowledgements. We acknowledge this land that we meet on today is the traditional land of the Kaurna people, and we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide region and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the Kaurna people today. We also pay respect to the cultural authority of Aboriginal people visiting or attending from other areas of South Australia and Australia. On behalf of the City of Burnside, I gratefully acknowledge and pay respect to those who gave their lives for this country and its people. Please remain standing for the opening prayer. We pray for understanding and guidance in our debate as we make decisions that will impact on the lives of all those who reside, study, work and visit the City of Burnside. Grant us wisdom as we serve our community. Please be seated. I welcome the members to the gallery and ask them to observe in respectful silence as the Chamber deliberates on matters that relate to the City of Burnside. Should there be a fire or an emergency, the alarm will sound and you are asked to follow directions of Council staff. I need to remind all that Council meetings are live streamed through the City of Burnside website, and a copy of tonight's agenda is available by downloading from this website. I remind elected members of the importance of using their microphones appropriately so that those at home can hear clearly. Now, we have no apologies. We do have a leave of absence granted to Councillor Cornish. I would like a motion to confirm the minutes, please. Councillor Davis. Moved and seconded Councillor Lemon. Those in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously. There are no deputations. However, I do need to explain that there was a request for a deputation that came in at 1:15 this afternoon. It was forwarded to me, but I declined permission because according to the rules of a deputation, a request must be made in writing to the CEO at least 24 hours before the commencement of the meeting. This was not the case, so I refused the request, but I did encourage the use of public question time as an alternative for that person to have their say. If that person, this person does not appear to be in the room this evening. I was going to say, however, if you believe that you wish to hear such a deputation, which is related to item 10.4 on the agenda, you would need to move a motion as this. But I wasn't going to make a decision that was contrary to the rules.
Notwithstanding this public holiday yesterday?
It doesn't matter, the email could have been still sent. And up until lunchtime today, I think it would have been reasonable, but at 1:15 this afternoon, I thought it was unreasonable. Point 7, petitions. We have one petition from Sue DeLeo. Does anyone have any questions in relation to that petition? No? Oh yes, and there is a motion there. Do I have a motion, mover of the motion? No, Councillor Davis. Do you wish to speak on it? No. Councillor Davey wishes to second it? Yeah, that's what I said, wishes, and you don't wish to speak, all right. Those who are in favour of receiving this petition? Those against? Carried. Now we have public question time, and I'm going to first of all defer to the CEO, who has some answers to questions that have been previously asked.
Is the time for public question time start now?
No, after these have been answered, because these are leftover ones from previous meeting.
Thank you, Mayor Monso. At the meeting held on 26th of February 2019, Mr John Hartley of Glen Osmond asked, can you please advise me, firstly, how many properties were advised of the planning application made to the State Planning Authority, and under what category we lodged the planning application? Secondly, how many properties of the 23,000 or so that make up Burnside were consulted? And how many actually responded about the Conningham Street Depot Transfer Station, Men's Shed Nursery development. Finally, how many people were consulted regarding the placement of this facility or portion thereof, and perhaps more appropriate locations such as the Linden Park Nursery site? It should be noted that this question was asked at the previous council meeting. 283 properties were directly notified as part of the development application, which was a Category 3 consultation process. Council undertook consultation on the draft Conningham Street Master Plan in line with mechanisms and processes adopted in April 2017. This included a letter to residents and businesses, approximately 4,200, and non-resident ratepayers, approximately 1,100, in the Eastwood and Glenunga ward, in addition to an email advice to registered users of Engage.Burnside, 1,673 participants. As part of the consultation process, 72 responses were received. 56 respondents submitted a survey response via Engage.Burnside. 13 submissions were received via email or letter, and 3 telephone conversations were conducted. 311 people visited the project page on Engage.Burnside, and 152 people took action to learn about the project on Engage.Burnside, including downloading a document or opening a link. In regard to the men's shed component, earlier consultation included interviews with 58 stakeholders, including 32 participants in the Eastern Region Men's Shed program, their carers, staff and volunteers during the site visits to all 6 program groups. This accounted for more than one half of the men's shed participants at the time. The results of the community consultation were very strongly in favour of the proposed master plan. 84% of respondents indicated yes to the question, do you support the idea of a combined community space and depot? At the meeting held on 26 February 2019, Mr Peter Hartley of Glen Osmond asked, please can you tell me why the council is pursuing the $2 million men's shed development at obscene haste, given the community still doesn't know if it has even categorised properly this development application, let alone how the council can justify spending $2 million on 246 square metres of men's shed. Can we have your assurance that this extreme waste of money constructed in the wrong spot will be put on hold by this council until the farcical project can be pulled to where it belongs at a cost to the community can afford? In response, council is pursuing this development in line with existing resolutions endorsed and carried by the council. The development application aspect has been previously answered. The project is underway and cannot be put on hold, as this would be contrary to the adopted resolutions and position of council. At the meeting held on 26th of February 2019, Mr Jim Jacobson of Fruitville asked, what sort of complaint was it that necessitated this council meeting on Saturday and again Wednesday? The council meetings in question were conducted in line with legislation governing such operations of council. The topic item referenced is a matter proposed, discussed and retained in confidence as outlined in the agenda and public minutes, and is consistent with the provisions of Section 90 of the Local Government Act 1999.
Thank you, Mr Deb. I will now... question? Sorry, there's one more.
Excuse me, sorry, I missed one. At the meeting held on 12th of February 2019, adjourned to 26 February 2019, Mr Jim Jacobson of Fruitville asked, how are citizens of this city supposed to uphold the law in accordance with their federal statutory requirements of citizenship when clearly the council appears to be intending to break the law or has broken it? In response, the council confirms that any complaint received with respect to the manner in which it observes its legislative requirements, procedures and processes will be dealt with in accordance with its complaint handling policy, which is available from the council offices and online.
So I hope that fully responds to all the questions that have been asked, and we've caught up now. So now, Councillor Piggott, you wish to ask a question or make a comment?
Yeah, I just had a question in regard to the process, and I'm very pleased to hear the answers come back. I just feel and perhaps it's a comment rather than a question, but I feel there's a number of inaccuracies given with the question being asked, in particular in regard to the Conningham Street depot development. The question had a preamble of significant inaccuracies as well as the question, and I feel in future perhaps we should address the accuracy of those points as well, in addition to answer the actual question asked.
Thank you for that comment, and we will attempt to do that. Don't always have the information in front of me or councillor, so hopefully this is actually clarified rather than responding without evidence to back it up. But now we have, I believe, 4 questions this evening, and there is a lady who would like to be our first questioner. And I just need to explain, I did come over and speak to you. You have 2 minutes in which to ask your questions within that time frame. And all you need to do when you come to this seat is turn your microphone on by pressing the speak button. But I think perhaps Councillor Lemon, would you mind aiding her if that's okay? And if you could just state who you are and what suburb you are from. Right. Thank you, Councillor Lemon.
So I'm Margot Overton. I've lived in Beaumont for 40 plus years. I go walking up Chambers Gully each weekend on a Sunday. And I mean, I appreciate it's a problem on parking on Waterfall Gully Road, but it's chaotic. And so people just park on there was a new footpath built on one side about 2 years or so ago. I mean, people just park on the beginning of that footpath. And I know it's a problem, but I just think if there were a few stakes driven into the ground, it might, teach people where not to park. So I presume Burnside Council are responsible for that.
I'm assuming you mean stakes to stop people from parking there rather than
of course,
something to puncture their tyres.
Yes, but I know people can knock them over, drive over them, but...
I think that we can take that on notice and just have a look at whether that's possible.
Because, recently there was a car parked on top of the footpath. Mm-hmm. And of course it's a problem crossing Waterfall Gully Road and the cars are whizzing past. And of course here's this car parked on the footpath.
And just to, so you understand too, the road actually belongs to Dipty.
Okay,
but the verges and the footpaths are our responsibility.
Oh, okay.
So we will follow that up
Sure.
And investigate. We know, and I know that our councillors for the Beaumont ward particularly are very much aware of the problems related to parking. And so are Dipty, and the state government is aware of the problems as well. We have certainly made it quite clear to them over a number of times over the last few years. So thank you for your question.
And it's just getting worse.
Thank you for your question.
Shall I turn off speaker?
Right, the second question is from... Thank you. Again, if you could just introduce yourself and what suburb you're from.
I'm Rebecca Jeans from Hazelwood Park, and my question pertains for the voting process for your neighbourhood budget, but I guess applies to anything in which you are allegedly trying to get a community vote. So while I welcome initiatives like this, nobody that I've asked, and I walk in the parks and I work in the area, knows anything about it. I'm registered with Engage Burnside and found the process of voting online very difficult, and I'm aware of a number of other people who found it, who struggled with it as well. There are a lot of residents like my mother who don't use the internet, it's an old area, who have no idea about this, and yet when shown the options were quite interested in a couple of them. So last week, all Burnside residents received Focus, their community newsletter. Why couldn't the 10 proposals have been listed in this, making the voting process a more free and fair process? And if you're genuinely interested in getting public opinion, I think that should apply whenever you're going to community vote, and not just for people who are enrolled on the internet and Engage Burnside.
Thank you very much for your very interesting question. I think in relation to the Focus, and correct me if I'm wrong, the deadline for the Focus was about 6 weeks ago. So I don't think that the deadline for the voting on that was actually lined up.
The council knows when their deadlines are, and you can line them up, or you can make it possible for only a very small proportion of people to be aware and be able to vote.
We do take that on
Thank
board, and particularly your comment about not everybody has the internet. And we're very much aware of many people within our community who do not have access.
And it was difficult on the internet.
And your point about finding it difficult to respond to the survey is an important one that we need to follow up, and administration has taken that on board.
I think you have to give people the paper option.
Thank you very much. These are really good examples of why we have question time. Thank you. Yes, number 3. You know this process, Mr. Hartley?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Your Worship. Good evening, your Mayor and elected members and members of the public gallery. My name is Peter Hartley of Glen Osmond, and my topic concerns workers' compensation. By way of background, my questions relate to the massive 1,200% blowout in the annual cost of workers' compensation claims from $15,004 in 2014-15 to $200,651 in 2016-17. In the same period, the total number of claims has risen over 233% from 6 to 20, whilst the average claim has seen an increase from $2,500 to over $10,000. My questions are these. Can the administration please explain why such deterioration was not brought to the attention of Council when budgetary matters were being discussed at the time? And secondly, can you advise the reasons for the huge spike in workers' compensation claims, costs and claims in 2016-17? Thirdly, what strategies do the administration adopt to actively manage and reduce these costs back to a sustainable level? And fourthly, can you provide the number of workers' compensation claims and costs for 2017-18 and the respective figures for 2018-19 to date? Finally, having regard for the upward pressure on contributions, what impact did the massive blowout have on future Burnside Council premiums to the LGO scheme? Thank you.
A very expansive series of questions that I am not able to answer at this moment, and so I think we're going to have to take it on notice, but we will take them on notice. And if you have got that question written out, we really appreciate you. Perhaps, Mr. Dabrowski, you could collect that question. That will save us trying to interpret it off of by listening to the recording or viewing the recording. Oh, thank you, Mr. Spearman.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Question number 4.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jim Jacobson of Freeville. My question tonight deals with legal matters undertaken by members of staff and elected members. I don't expect any immediate response to these and would expect them to be taken on notice. First question is, can you please advise what were the legal costs incurred by the Burnside Council in pursuing Council Lance Bagster unsuccessfully through Safe Work SA? Secondly, can you please advise the legal costs incurred by the Burnside Council in pursuing Councillor Lance Bagster unsuccessfully through Fair Work Australia? What is the estimated or actual staff time and cost incurred in mounting these unsuccessful legal actions? Next, what are the total costs incurred in legal fees incurred by this council in driving Councillor Lance Bagster from this chamber and preventing him from fulfilling his democratically elected role as an elected member of this council? Finally, and I think the most important one, which should concern every elected member here, is finally, why did the council use a mediation report by Teresa Hines for a plethora of purposes, including publication on council's website and subsequent legal action, when the law prohibits its use for any other purpose under Section 271 of the Local Government Act, which states, without any exception, evidence of anything said or done in an attempt to resolve a matter by mediation, conciliation, or neutral evaluation under this section must not be disclosed in subsequent proceedings. I repeat, must not be disclosed in subsequent proceedings. It therefore is a very reasonable question to ask, why did this council do so? Thank you. That's my question for this evening.
I'm going to ask again if you have those questions
I will
recorded.
be more than happy to hand it over.
Having
Thank
a
you, Your
copy.
Worship.
I think you can understand that I'm not able to be in
No,
a position to
as
answer
I
all
said,
of those
I
questions
don't
this evening,
anticipate it.
but appreciate you have the right to ask them. Right, is there anyone else who has a question this evening? I only handed out 4, so I'm assuming that was it. All right, thank you. And thank you for the 2 new people who came and presented tonight. I think it was also really good to see people actually taking a part in the purpose of this public question time. Thank you. That's not denying the actuality of the other 2 people who we have heard questions from before. Number 9 is questions on notice, and these have been responded to. Through just asking the CEO, did you get those answers from the Superloop in time? So they're on the document, okay? And the 9.2, again, the questions have been recorded there for you. Now, we move to number 10, motions on notice. And our first motion is 10.1, policy considerations regarding sporting clubs using City of Burnside facilities and membership base. Councillor Dawes, page 15.
Thank you, Mayor. I wish to move that a report be presented to Council by April 2019 on whether it should be a requirement within the leasing and licensing of community facilities policy and the sport and recreation strategy for sporting clubs using City of Burnside facilities to have a majority of members, both senior and junior categories, as Burnside residents over the period of a lease renewal, a maximum of 5 years.
Wish to speak to it now?
I wish to speak. Thank you very much. I didn't realise tonight, but I have got my crow socks on, and also I've got a Taekwondo Olympic tie, and it wasn't by design. Council will remember that this matter was raised at the last meeting when we were having discussions about sport use at the Glunga Hub. The motion tonight relates to council-wide sport spaces, not just those who use Glunga Hub. I'm a strong believer in the diversity of sport opportunities for all Burnside residents to enjoy, no matter what age group or gender. However, and this is the most important point I like to make in my talk, I also believe that there would be an expectation from Burnside residents that sport clubs using Burnside facilities should consist in both senior and junior categories of a majority, talking about 50.1%, of Burnside residents, especially where those facilities are provided at an excellent discount rate by council. This would require a change to the licensing and leasing policy and a change to the recreation and sport strategy. Hence a request for a report from administration for future consideration. If this was implemented over a period of time, we should give clubs the life of a lease period. I'm suggesting a maximum of 5 years to achieve a majority membership. This policy change would, I believe, better energise, focus each club's membership drives to residents within the City of Burnside, more so than currently exist. They do it quite well now, but I think this will give them a reason why they should be very much promoting their clubs within the Burnside area. So this would certainly assist in enhancing the recreational activities of our residents. Now, whether this should be an expectation, a target, a future aim or a requirement, I've used the word requirement here, I will await the administration's report before finalising my view. I think that there's a lot of things in play here, so I'd like to see what the administration come back with. I would like a requirement, but I'm willing to have a good look at that. If in 5 years' time we again have the same debate last meeting when we discussed the uses of Glunga Hub, and one of the clubs consists mainly of non-Burnside residents, and another club consists mainly of Burnside residents, I would favour the club with a majority in regard to the times we allocate it at Glenunga, just as an example. Our current policy only gives priority to clubs with residents, either majority or non-majority, over clubs from other council areas in regard to the use of our sports spaces. I've got a couple more things to say, but I think I'll say that at the end, and I'm putting it forward for your consideration and support, councillors. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder, please?
Sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. I support this motion, and I do look forward to our next discussion, which will be probably quite brief, and we will certainly, I see that this motion will contribute to for the greater good of Burnside residents, and also encourage diversity in different sports as well. So thank you.
Councillor Davis?
Yeah, I think this is a terrible idea. Essentially what you're talking about here is a thing called protectionism. The motion is to protect Burnside residents or our little patch from other councils. And in my view, all that will do is you'll have retribution against you. That's where the word came from. The fact is that, countries try and do this. They try and do this with all types of trade policies and things like that, and it's no different here. So I play men's netball, and I go and play indoor netball at Stepney. You start saying that only Burnside residents can play here, they'll do the same thing to you. If you look at something like Priceline Stadium or the indoor netball courts at Stepney, and I play in Stepney up in the hills and in different Modbury, are they going to turn around and say, oh no, only our local residents can play here? And then I'd be asking this council to build an indoor netball facility for me so that I can play on it. Because if they start discriminating against me, or if we start discriminating against them, they'll start discriminating against us. And the fact is that it is discrimination. And what you need to remember, and it's based on your location, where you live. Only people who live in our area are good enough to use our facilities. That's the message that you're sending to our community. And furthermore, it's going to be incredibly difficult to implement. It will take you a number of cycles to actually implement this. And during the time being, those sporting clubs who come up for this renewal licence earlier than others will pay a higher price, or they'll be expected to meet that 51% first rather than anybody else who comes up for it. I also think that you need to consider that sometimes sports have a larger region than just the council area. Sometimes they take into account the entire eastern region. Are you then going to say that sports, say hockey for example, that doesn't just cover one particular council area is less of an advantage? Or what about clubs which are closer to a border? I have a number of clubs which are very close to my border. For example, the bowling club or the cricket and rugby club in Kensington Gardens Reserve. They're not too far away from Campbelltown, the McGill village, the McGill line. A lot of their members would come from Campbelltown, which is just across that border. Are you now proposing to say that those clubs have 51%, which might be very different from from a club that's located in the centre of which is in the centre of our area? Another point that you should consider is that it's not necessarily always our money. It's not residents' money for half of that. For the Glenunga, for example, we got a huge grant from the state government. And in Kensington Gardens Reserve, they're looking at new sporting facilities. Well, if the state government is looking at handing out money to one group or another, or for us to construct facilities, and we say we're going to exclude and discriminate against anyone who's not a Burnside resident, anyone who's not from Burnside isn't good enough. And that's essentially what you're saying, because you're saying to those clubs, you can't come here if you don't have 51% of us. Then I think that would seriously hurt your funding opportunities, or the possibility that we can actually get state funding. And that'd be very difficult to quantify, because when a state government looks at providing state government money, which they get from probably GST from the entire state, and they look at putting it into a particular area, they don't just look at your council lines, they look at what is the benefit to the residents collectively. And so essentially you'd be undermining that process. I don't think it's ever okay to discriminate against somebody based on where they come from and exclude them because they can't afford to live here. What if they grew up here? What happens if they were a child who are part of the cricket club, whose friends are here, that they've built a team around it? And then you say, well, you reach a certain age or the parents move and off you go. You can't come back. Schools don't do this. I don't think anywhere else that I can think of any kind of public policy goes ahead and discriminates based on where you live. Schools, my understanding, is if you move into the area and you stay there and you're enrolled, you can continue there. That might not be the case. In my view, this is a very, very bad policy, and we shouldn't put this type of onerous requirement on our clubs. However, I'm probably going to vote for it because I'm very interested to see what the report is. And the only reason I would vote for it is because I asked the administration how much of a burden it would be to prepare this report. And I don't think you should ever forget how much it costs us to prepare reports like this. My understanding, it wouldn't be that high. But you need to remember that we pay our general managers and our CEOs a lot of money. And to commit to reports like this that perhaps we shouldn't, or if you're thinking around the table, oh, I'll just get a report, it's very, very costly to our residents and to our staff. So I'll support it, but with reticence.
Councillor Piggott.
Oh, I'm next. Fabulous. Well, I'm going to say from the outset I am going to support it based on what I've heard so far. However, I sort of feel that both Councillor Dawes and Councillor Davis have gone early in that what it requests is a report, and Councillor Dawes seems to think it's quite a good idea and Councillor Davis thinks it's a terrible idea. And I think the beauty about getting a report is that we can actually have the facts as to where it does finally land. Personally, I feel it may struggle as a concept, but it does, I think, raise interesting issues, and it may not be the fact that we consider non-Burnside residents as a second-class citizens and don't allow them to play, but it may encourage clubs that are supported by the City of Burnside to be far more alive to promoting to residents of the City of Burnside. So that may be a halfway house that, having accused the other two of going early, perhaps I've gone early as well. I would like, if I could, just ask a question while I'm on the roll. Can I ask, do we grab these statistics now in terms of Burnside? And perhaps the second thing is, how many clubs do we have?
Through the chair, we've currently got 52 leases and licences in place. Now they're for community groups, not just sporting groups, and our leasing and licensing of community facilities policy does cover both. And so there's a broader question about whether this is just for sporting groups or whether it's also for community groups. With sporting clubs specifically, we've got about 22 leases and licences in place and another 6 permits. We don't currently have that data. At the moment, the motion's looking for a report by April. That would be tight in its own right, but if we did want to collect the data on where the clubs are currently sitting, we would need some more time to be able to collect that data to include in the report.
Understand. All right, well, just rounding that out, I feel getting a report is a good idea. I think administration could give us great insight into this, whether that includes the numbers or that would be preferable, I feel. But I think it would give us some good information that we could then debate in regard to what we do with it, if anything. But and while we shouldn't put out reports without considering what it does chew up in regard to resources, I think this is a good thing to have a look at, so I will support it.
Councillor Hughes.
I was similarly going to say, I guess, that I do see some issues with potentially the concept, but I'm not against getting a report. I guess having been a junior playing sport myself, I did live in the area, but then I moved out and then I moved back. So I can see potentially there being some issues in terms of numbers and how you get that data and how you maintain it, and just understanding that. And I think most clubs are just always on the lookout for players. I think there are some clubs that are obviously not one of the big mainstream sports perhaps, but people are just always on the lookout for a good team person. It doesn't really matter where they live. So I'm happy to support getting a report. I think the logistics and things, we can debate that once the report comes back. But I do see there are benefits in hosting people from outside of our community within our council area. They come, they eat at our bakeries, they go to our local shops as well. So I think it's not just, I guess, about where people live, but I'm happy to support the report. In this sense, I do wonder whether it should just be limited to sporting clubs if we're going down this avenue, but I think let's start from there and see where it ends up.
Councillor Lemon.
Thank you. I too have difficulties with the discriminatory aspect of this, and I particularly think it's discriminatory in a way that you could actually be offspring of a family that lives here, and let's say, for instance, you join the Glenunga Tennis Club because that's where you live, and you play there throughout your childhood and into your teenage years and possibly even into your 20s while you might be taking further education. And then you leave home. You do want to stay at the Glenunga Tennis Club. And I think that looking at discriminating against people because they no longer live in the area is problematic for me. And given that we're talking about, well, I'm talking about the Glenunga Tennis Club, I would also make a further point. The Glenunga Tennis Club has been around for 87 years, and I think in its current spot. And I think and that club would have, in its 87 years, have actually had declines in membership and then boosted its membership over time. It would have had people from Unley and Norwood being part of it, and then now mainly people from Glenunga being part of it. But what's fantastic about that club is that it's been part of our community for 87 years, no matter who was part of it. And I, for one, am really pleased to have a club with that sort of longevity in my ward. And I think part of that longevity, and this is important when we're looking at leases, is you don't look at one-year leases for sporting clubs because they cannot make long-term plans. The Glenunga Tennis Club could never have made long-term plans and would never have been there for 87 years if we'd imposed way too much in terms of bureaucracy on them over the last 87 years. So I really do have issues about the bureaucracy. And the final point that I'd make is when we were discussing the use of the Glenunga Ovals at our last council meeting, we would not have made a decision, at least I would not have made a decision, about how those ovals were going to be leased and the time that was being given to one club or the other on the basis of whether there were Burnside residents in it. We made the decision on the leases of those ovals, and quite rightly, on the use of the grounds and a maintenance of a good playing surface, not on how many people living in Burnside are actually members of those clubs. And I think we need to keep that in mind when we look at things like this.
Councillor Carbone.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Davis used the word protectionism tonight, and it came about as a dirty word, I feel. And look, I'm not afraid to be called a protectionist. I've certainly been called worse, and this council has been called worse. So if that's our only criticism of this council, I say so what. This motion is a good motion. It has been brought about, I believe, as a result of our last meeting with the Glenunga Hub, which some of us have had to deal with the fallout of. And regardless of how you feel about how you voted at the last meeting, how the football club feel, whether you agree with it or not, is that they are a group of majority of locals and they were dudded by a group of non-locals. That's how they feel. Whether you agree with it or not is up to you. But we need to look after our local residents first. We need to look after our own. Local residents pay for these facilities, they pay for the maintenance, they pay rates, and we need to look after our ratepayers first. It's as simple as that.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else who wishes to speak, either for or against this matter? If not, I will pass it back to Councillor Dawes.
Thank you very much. I've just noted a couple of things. First, I want to thank Councillor Hughes for her collegiality here. We went through whether we should include non-sporting with sporting clubs and so forth. So I do want to thank Councillor Hughes for going through that process with me. I do get concerned by the words discrimination, protectionism. I don't see it that way. If it was 100%, I think I would say yes, we're protecting those clubs solely for Burnside residents. In regard to Glunga Hub debate, we did ask clubs, and I think that Michelle would support me here, for the percentage of Burnside residents that were in both the senior and junior categories, and that was a part of the discussion. So I still think that was a key part of it, not just the use of the spaces. The point I want to make very, very strongly is that these clubs are using council facilities at a hugely discounted rate. And based on that, I believe that having a majority of members as Burnside residents, 50.1%, isn't a huge ask. And it would certainly help the administration that those clubs are out there promoting their membership drives as much as we do. Just one example, to sign off, what it would mean for the soccer club of last meeting and the football club of last meeting if we did go ahead with this policy, even though Councillor Davis thinks it's very bad, but I'm very pleased he's prepared to have a look at the report. It would mean that soccer would have to obtain an extra 18 members over 5 years, and the football club an extra 17 members over 5 years. That is not a big ask, in my opinion. But what it does do, it does focus, energise the clubs to think about Burnside Council area as the #1 catchment area. Thank you, Mayor.
Those who are in favour of the motion, please raise your hands. Those against? Right, carried. The next one is page 17, 10.2, differential rate, not date. Councillor Piggott.
Not date, no.
On the agenda it says date.
Oh, I understand. I was going to say it's not a concept I've recently been availed of.
I just wondered whether you'd picked it up earlier.
Yeah. Actually, in putting this motion, could I just point out that I'm just asking for a report. I actually don't know where quite I sit in regard to what we would do with it in regard to going forward, in regard to differential rates. But it struck me in that it's been 3 or 4 years since Burnside introduced a differential rate on vacant land, and the reason for it at the time was to encourage people to do something with their vacant land. Burnside does not have a lot of vacant land, actually, and what it does have, we should encourage people to actually develop for a variety of reasons. One being is that people want to live here. Two being it can be an eyesore and cause issues for neighbours in terms of dust and vermin and etc. And that was the logic when it was put in for the first time, so that we now do have a differential rate on vacant land. Now, it came to light in the last fortnight where Adelaide Street McGill had there was a number of issues come from there, but one of the issues of a couple of residents was the number and state of vacant blocks. Adelaide Street currently has 4 in not a very large street. It's a bit of a perfect storm in a way. But it did raise the issue around vacant land and whether we should continue to encourage and perhaps encourage even further by looking at the differential rate going forward. So what this report asks for is really just a report as to where we are, what did happen after last time, because I'm not sure what impact that did have in regard to people pushing the accelerator on sorting out vacant land they hold. And then on the basis of that, what it might mean going forward, given it's budget time, and this is the time of year we should look at these things. So that's what I feel we should do. I don't think it will be an onerous task, hopefully, and I think it would be time well spent to inform the chamber ahead of this year's budget. What is the situation around differential rates on vacant land? So I seek your support.
Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Davey, do you wish to speak? Councillor Carbone.
Your Worship, I have a question. Well, I'd like to move a small amendment, but I'd like to ask the Council Administration first if it was possible. Do you want me to move the amendment first? I'll move the amendment. The question is, so we're talking about vacant properties here. Is that vacant land or is that abandoned vacant properties? Okay. Do we have any record to make this report possible if we included vacant properties and abandoned properties?
Through the Mayor, that would be very difficult for us to determine what was abandoned or vacant at any point in time in terms of properties. Vacant land is clearly very obvious, but the others are very difficult for us to ascertain.
Are you happy then to leave it? Okay. Councillor Hughes.
I just have a question in regards to when the land becomes unvacant as such. It's just the pouring of the slab, essentially. Or is it completion of construction?
Through the Mayor, yes, that's correct. As soon as the slab's down, and then the next time the rates are reviewed, that's when it kicks in.
So if you have a property, it's probably maybe not relevant to the actual motion, but it might be. If you have a property that they put a slab down, start building, and then it sits there with no work being done for a year or more, it would only be at a residential rate. It wouldn't be at a vacant block rate.
Through the Chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay, so the only incentive is to get your slab down. Anyway, that's just a question. I don't know whether... I think people have already figured it out. Okay, no, that's fine. Just a question. I don't think there's any possible way of monitoring that anyway, because there's nothing visible that would tell you whether...
Can I just ask another question? Oh, yes, no, please do.
Through the Mayor, the issue with that is that once you commence construction, you have typically 3 years to complete.
Yep.
So if you take your full 3 years to complete, then you get
You can take your full 3 years. That's fine. Thank you.
Can I just ask a question, and it follows on from that. When a demolition is done on a site, and then the site is left with nothing done to it at all for sometimes a year to 2 years, what happens to rates in that period of time?
Through the Mayor, once the site is vacant and there's an assessment done on what's on the property, if it's vacant at that point in time, then it would be charged the differential rate for a vacant property.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, now, Councillor Davey.
Thank you. My question was a follow-up one to that, and I think the CEO might have answered it. I've got a couple of properties in my area, and they're very high-value properties that have sat there for at least 2 years since they were purchased. Obviously, well, apparently while they're waiting for some sort of development approval or doing all the design stage. Do they come into this category? Thank you.
Councillor Henschke.
Thank you, Mayor. In regards to the vacant land, I'm wondering whether some of this land may well be vacant land with native vegetation on it, and whether this is actually fair to increase rates on a property with native vegetation. Perhaps it's, a family asset that the family want to keep for a very long time, for the next generation. We don't know. So I would like to see a bit more granularity on the information about vacant land. Is that possible, please?
Through the Mayor, this is a current council policy. So we do charge differential rates on vacant property, and the vacancy refers to the lack of any physical structure rather than native vegetation. So that's the trigger for generating additional rate revenue or the differential rate. It's the absence of a physical structure on the property, an undeveloped property, so to speak. So there may still be native vegetation on the land, but that's not impacted by the rating because it relates to an asset, physical asset on the property.
I don't see any other names. Oh, so have you got a question, Councillor?
Yeah, actually, I thought I just might follow up question that, if I could. So presumably there are, well, my question is, the properties that Councillor Henschke describes, presumably some of the ones currently paying a differential rate on vacant land do subscribe to that description. Would that be right? We would have such properties in that list? Or perhaps I'll ask another way. Would this report bring out, perhaps, would it give the Chamber any idea in terms of what number of properties may be described as Councillor Henschke has described, as opposed to a block of land?
Through the Mayor, no, it won't, because that would be an incredibly onerous task for us to assess every vacant property to determine whether or not there was native vegetation there. Because quite clearly at this point in time, it's very obvious. Either is a building on the site or there isn't. But to determine whether or not there's native vegetation on a particular property would be very difficult.
Yep.
So if we had adjoining properties, sorry, question again. If we had adjoining properties, you know, there are some of the old areas that have double blocks. In that case, if they had a tennis court on one of those blocks, that's considered a property or a development? Is it or not? Is a tennis court considered a development? It's not. So that's not in a residential area. If it's a double block and one block has got a tennis court on it, or one block has part of a shed on it, then it would, and the rest is just bush or scrub or garden, then that's not considered a vacant property, is it?
Through the Mayor, no, that's correct.
Okay. You've got something else to add? Yeah, please.
Through the Mayor, just to be clear, the purpose of having the differential rate on vacant properties is to encourage property owners to develop their properties and not to have vacant land sitting there vacant for years at a time. So if a property is made up of two allotments and one allotment is the dwelling and the other allotment is a tennis court, that's not considered to be vacant land. Vacant land is land that has no development on it whatsoever, sitting there vacant, and the differential rate there is to encourage the redevelopment of the property so you don't have what I consider sometimes to be blights on landscapes through vacant land.
And if I remember rightly, that's how we actually 4 years ago brought in this, because there were some distinct properties that were mentioned at the time. One of them, namely on the corner of McGill Road and Glenburn Road, that is still vacant, and it doesn't have any native bush garden. That was problematic, and it actually raised the issue, if I'm right, Councillor Piggott. All right, so Councillor Carbone, you wish to speak or another question? Okay.
So, question to the administration, would they concede that a flaw of this policy is that if you wanted to not pay the premium, that you could simply have a derelict building on site, not demolish it, just keep the building until future years when it was worth developing?
Through the Mayor, that's technically correct, but there are other consequences of having a derelict building on site.
Like rodent?
Depending on the nature of the dereliction, if it's structurally unsound, then there'd be building orders placed. Yeah. If it's infested with rats and mice, then the EHA would be issuing notices. So there is a consequence of taking that approach as well, which would have potentially a financial impost.
Right, I don't see any further names on my list, so can I take it back to Councillor Piggott?
Yeah, look, I haven't got much more to add. Thank you for the debate. I think some of the issues that were picked up here may be teased out in the report, and so they may rise again when we do get the report. But I think it is worth having a look at see what the current status is. Did it work last time? Should we keep it or should we change it? So I seek your support.
Those in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously. Move to 10.3 on page 19, Hazelwood Park Car Park. Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just amend this slightly, Rob, if I may. My motion is that a report be brought to Council in April to inform the 2019-2020 budget process, which addresses the costs and benefits of replacing the old asphalt roadway in Hazelwood Park's car park, north and east aspect, with permeable asphalt stroke paving in accordance with water sensitive urban design principles and the Hazelwood Park Conservation Management Plan. And 2, that any works currently planned for this section of roadway be placed on hold until Council has considered this matter. So it's just one amendment in that sentence. Be placed on hold. Thank you. I've moved this motion tonight to, I'll give you some background. It's to review a decision made in asset management terms in the last budget for road resurfacing of this road. But much has changed since then. The Hazelwood Park Conservation Management Plan was finalised in 2016 after an extensive community engagement process. There is considerable community interest in an ownership of Hazelwood Park from local park users, residents and the thousands who visit each year. So the community engagement process was very vigorous and I think it went through 2 or 3 stages. The Conservation Management Plan is underpinned by the fact that trees define the character of the park and contribute to its unique sense of place. Therefore, tree management practice is essential to maintain the health and useful life of existing trees to retain the character of the park. Adoption of the Conservation Management Plan, on adoption of this plan, Council decided to maintain the existing off-street parking configuration in response to residents who overwhelmingly did not want additional street parking. To improve the efficiency of this parking and to enhance user safety, tree health and water management. Since then, we've experienced significant drought and the effects of climate change have meant very low rainfall. This is placing great stress on the trees and vegetation in this area of Hazelwood Park. It receives no supplementary watering and as a result is the driest, most arid part of the park. Especially following the very dry winter and hotter than usual summer. It's very heavily utilised with park visitors, playground users and in season by many swimming pool customers. Many of these customers, to give you an idea, 112,000 last financial year and 95,400 to date this year, have provided $788,000 in the last financial year to the coffers and $656,000 to date this financial year. So a huge number of these people utilise this area of the car park, along with those who also park on Howard Terrace to use the swimming pool. The Conservation Management Plan outlines that trees define the character of Hazelwood Park and contribute, as I've said, to its sense of place. It acknowledges that tree management is important to maintaining the health and the useful life of the existing trees. So the current proposal to repair the roadway is, I believe, no longer suitable as it's designed to top up the existing asphalt. I believe that with all the research and development currently happening, that we can do better than this in terms of making the paving more permeable, particularly for stormwater runoff and prevention because there are significant drainage problems in the area, and for most importantly, watering of trees in the area. So I think a lot of people think that permeable asphalt or paving treatment would be ideal to be installed in this area. Out of interest, University of Melbourne Engineering School has recently developed, I think in the last 18 months, permeable asphalt made from recycled tyres. And I understand that one of our colleagues, the city, or colleague councils, City of Mitcham, has installed permeable paved road sections and has also obtained grants to assist the process. They've found permeable paving, obviously, allows water to soak through to the soil below, reducing flood risk and stormwater runoff and helping water the nearby trees and vegetation. While permeable asphalt or paving may cost more, I believe we must explore what is available at this stage, as this is an investment in our environment and in this highly utilised and valued state heritage listed reserve with so many customers. So we're receiving fairly good income, and I think we could probably justify exploring this option. So hopefully you'll support the motion.
Councillor Hubel, you wishing to second it?
I do wish to second it, yes. Wish to second it, sorry. I have nothing else to add though. Councillor Davey, thank you for the motion and your remarks.
Before I invite debate, I'd like to find out status at the moment, please, through Ms Kennedy. Today.
Through the chair, we had been liaising with our asphalt contractor to book in the works to resurface the car park. Having said that, we're waiting obviously until the outcome of this motion to see where we go from here. If this is one, then we won't go forward with that. If it's not, then we'll proceed.
Any other comments that you wish to make in relation to the permeable paving suggestion? Speaking as an engineer.
Through the Mayor, there are obviously some benefits in terms of permeable paving, and we've provided those in an information document to the previous council, and I'm happy to forward that again to the new council if people are interested. One of the challenges in this particular site has been the cost, so we did have some designs done up for undertaking permeable paving in this car park area, and the cost was about 10 times as much as asphalting, so it was just under $800,000 to look at permeable paving as opposed to about $75,000 for asphalting. And because it was such a significant cost increase, and the feedback we'd had from residents and community was that they didn't really want to change to that car parking area. We thought we need to make good at this point in time. There are, as Councillor Davey quite rightly pointed out, there are some issues with water runoff and pooling and that sort of thing. There are quite a lot of potholes in that car park at the moment. We thought we'll book it in our program to make it good for the time being until council can decide whether they want to do a significant upgrade to that area or not.
Councillor Hughes.
I would just like to propose an amendment that is part of the report, so either make a new point 2 or point 3, to consider potential funding that may be appropriate for the project. Consider available or potential funding that may be available for the project, external funding. So just to provide, I guess, a bit of clarity and reasoning for that, I guess, having done a little bit of reading recently, there's things such as Resilient East, I think, that we're a part of, and there's obviously been lots of talk around heat mapping within our community. So I'm just wondering whether it would be possible to consider external funding through things like the NRM board and things like that.
Can I just suggest, rather than making an amendment, that if it's okay with Councillor Davey and with Councillor Hubel, that you just incorporate it within the motion?
Absolutely.
I would be happy to do that.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Davey?
Absolutely.
Councillor Hubel? Right. Need to go on with an amendment. Do you wish to speak any further on that matter?
I guess I just wanted to reiterate the point. I think most of us will have seen recently the heat map of Adelaide, and I think this is an opportunity, although it perhaps is more expensive, but we can consider it as part of the budget process going forward, and just look at things that we can be innovative in our community to consider how we can cool our large spaces and how we can incorporate water-sensitive urban design into that space. I guess it's an area that's not just used by residents within the Kensington Park ward, it's used by people from throughout the whole of the council and also people from outside of our local area. So I think it's something that we should do properly and consider how we can be creative around cooling our community. Thank you.
Councillor Lemon.
I have a couple of questions, if I may. The first is, given Ms Kennedy's earlier information, could I assume that putting together this sort of report would be relatively easy, given the work that you've already done in this area?
Through the Chair, yes, we have most of the information that we could include in this type of report, with the exception of the potential funding opportunities, which we'd need to do a little bit of looking into.
And my second question is, if this is successful, that will put your original looking for quotes on hold. How long will that be delayed, given that this says in 2 weeks?
Through the Chair, if this motion is successful, we won't undertake resurfacing work this year.
At all?
Not in this location.
Thank you.
Councillor Henschke.
Thank you, Mayor. Michelle, thank you very much. And look at water-sensitive urban design, it's a great idea and I'm all for it. I'm thinking, Michelle, about priorities in the whole of the city of the Burnside. And when you said this was going to cost 10 times as much, what I was thinking about, well, what are our priorities? Now, okay, this potential bit of asphalt is right next to a very big park. So it's in it, yeah, it's in it, pardon. Thank you. So it's in a park. So this permeable paving, is it true that it allows recharge of rainfall into the aquifer? Is that one of the benefits of it?
Through the Chair, it's dependent on how the system's designed. It's my understanding, and I haven't, it's been some time since I've had a look at the designs that were done for this particular area, but I believe it incorporated stormwater drainage underneath the permeable paving, which would push it through the stormwater system as opposed to recharging the aquifers.
Okay, so it's not for recharging the aquifer. So permeable, what's the purpose, what's the benefit of this permeable paving?
Through the Chair, the benefits of permeable paving are a few-fold in this type of area. So one is additional watering to some of the tree roots. So the tree roots obviously run underneath areas of the car park at the moment. Another one is around preventing ponding and that sort of thing. Okay. So from a flood mitigation type point of view.
Great, thank you. So it's about, there's a lot of, I mean, I've been there and there are a lot of gum trees. So the root zones, the tree root zones would be covered by the asphalt and could affect these particular significant gum trees. Is that the problem?
Through the Chair, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a problem at the moment. Yes, we've got a lot of gum trees in that area and a lot of them do have asphalt that come right up to close to the trunk of the tree. Yeah. They're obviously quite accustomed to that environment as they are at the moment, and they've learned to survive in that environment. Making a change that would have, we would hope, a positive impact on the tree health.
Right. So then I go back to the priorities. So in our whole of the city, the Burnside, I'm imagining, say if we had a high urban density location and we had a choice for water sensitive permeable paving instead of asphalt, it could make a greater impact in different locations than this location. And those will be my last questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Through the Chair, there are a couple of aspects to this side of things. So at the moment, when we were looking at re-asphalting the car park, that was funded out of our renewal budget. So that's set through our asset management plan. So we look at the condition of all of our assets and how used they are, et cetera, and we forecast how long it's going to take for them to come to a particular condition. I know you know this because you worked in asset management, and we work out how much we need to spend and when, and that's how we've come up with this budget for resurfacing, taking into consideration the priorities across the city in terms of managing our assets. If you look at doing a significant upgrade, such as spending $800,000 to make it permeable paved, it's then no longer a renewal project, it becomes a new project or an upgrade. And so that's funded out of a different pool of money than what our renewal is. And the new prioritisation, I guess, is what comes to council through the business plan and budget process. And you'll be seeing the one for next year shortly. In fact, I think something came out today. So if this was something that council saw as a priority, it would be something you would need to consider in terms of the other new projects that are also being put up for next year, and whether this is more or less important than those.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Piggott.
I've got a couple of questions if I may as well. You said before what you're planning to do now was to sort of sort it out, not necessarily replace it, sort it out and buy a bit of time before you did it on a more permanent basis. Is that fair to say? What's the quantum? You may not have gone to tenders yet, but what is the sort of quantum we're talking about as you're about to push the button on in regard to the bitumen?
Through the chair, our estimate for resurfacing with asphalt was about 74,000. So that's based on our unit rates. We've got a standing contract with our asphalt contractor, and that's based on those in the area we'd be looking at covering.
Right, and if we did that, when would you be looking at doing a more permanent, if I can use that, decision in regard to if it was to be done differently? Would it buy you 2 years, 3 years?
Through the chair, so at this stage, any significant upgrade would be a decision of council. In the absence of that decision, we'd be maintaining as is.
Oh, okay, yeah, fair enough. And my last question is this a one or the other? Like, do I have to? It's either all bitumen or it's all permeable paving, or is there potentially a cleverer design that sort of saves us some money, but helps the trees?
Through the chair, there are probably 1,000 different ways that you can design this car park. There's 2 sections to it at the moment. You could choose to leave one as is and do permeable paving in the other, for example. We tend to try not to do them sort of within the same car park because the base preparation is quite different for asphalt than it is for permeable paving. But yes, you could look at doing different sections differently if you wanted to. They're not the designs we've got. It wasn't so much different sections, it was perhaps not having bitumen so go quite so close to trees and that sort of concept. And my last one is what are the consequences of there's potholes and the like in there? I haven't been there recently. I suppose I went there Australia Day. What are the consequences of not doing the upgrade now, not doing the bitumen now? Through the chair, the condition of the car park at the moment isn't great, so there are a number of potholes and that sort of thing. Obviously, when it rains, they pond water. That can undermine the asphalt a little bit as well and scour it out. They're also a little bit of a trip hazard for people that are walking through the car park. Having said that, it could be put off some time. It would. It just means that we tolerate those risks for a little bit longer.
Okay. Could I have a crack at an amendment? Thank you. Can I just put in as a number 4? Although I think number 2 probably should read as the last one. So if I could make that number 4, and if I could go and do a new number 3, is that? And what I'd like actually is that the report also consider a plan which uses both asphalt and permeable paving, but addresses the environmental issues. The environmental factors, perhaps. Can we put factors? Does that pick up trees and heat? What I'm after is a potential middle ground that we could consider, as opposed to, I mean, the headline figures you've thrown out now are environmental benefits of permeable paving. Environmental factors in play. How about that? Is that good? General enough? Addresses the environmental factors in play. What do you think, Michelle? Can you work with that?
Through the chair, we can look at another design, but it would be a struggle to get that back by April if we were going to look at another design for that car park.
How long do you need?
When practicable. And that would involve community consultation.
It's not going to be a budgetary issue until next year's financial year, then the urgency is not so great.
That means a bit.
So when practicable, or instead of April 19. Well, if this motion gets through, they're not going to be doing any asphalting.
So you've stopped it?
You're stopping it. So therefore, it is not as urgent in terms of getting this report through.
Sorry, for the trees, to get the water to the trees.
Through your worship, the most urgent part of this project would be to identify any risks to public safety over the health of the trees. The arborists are monitoring and working with us in this project, and we're doing it under the guidance of Council's arborists. If we delayed this project, which is fine, that's not a problem, we would undertake a risk assessment of the car park just now, and we would look to remedy any major trip hazards, whether for vehicle damaging as well. That would then provide us with an opportunity to bring back a detailed report for Council to consider. It's a lot easier for us to provide you full information in a considered report than it is to answer on the fly tonight. And then that can then influence your discussions going forward. And if you would like to then put a budget towards that, you can decide to do that at that time. The budget's about to go out to consultation shortly, so you may not be able to make that consultation period now anyway.
There's two issues, there's the asset management and the environmental.
So if I was to change it to when practical, is that an acceptable? Practicable? And just talking, and just talking to it, I think what this does is catch the problem before we just put bitumen down. Mr. Cant informed us that we could sort out any sort of really big potholes that are going to be a major issue to get us through the winter, and it allows it to be considered in a more measured way with perhaps a couple of options. Well, there's three in that motion, I guess, as it is when it comes back. So I think that's I'm sure not as was intended by the mover, but I feel it is, having listened to the debate, a good way to go. I actually think, and it could be that we should spend the money. I feel perhaps Hazelwood Park rises above a lot of places within the city of Burnside in regard to this option. The amount of money frightens me a little bit, but I do think it's, Councillor David put it out, it was in the park. It is one of our major assets, and so if that is the right thing to do, I wouldn't be averse to it. I would, though, like to see if there's a middle ground where we don't just bung bitumen down, and with that was rude, I didn't mean that to be, but we don't just go with the bitumen solution, and perhaps there's a cleverer one where it doesn't cost us that much money, but we still do have more protection for the trees, reduce the heat load, all those sorts of nice things as well. Perhaps not to the complete way it would be if we had no bitumen there at all. So I think as a way forward, that's a good way forward. To do that though, we need this to be seconded as an amendment, and we need to vote it up and then debate it further. But I think that's a good way to go. Someone would like to second that for me?
We have a seconder for the amendment. Yeah. Councillor Lemon, you wish to second it? Can she do that? Because she's always been... Okay. Yeah. No, she has asked questions.
Sorry.
Oh.
I said that was on.
Yeah, no, I was just checking because I was checking that you'd only asked a question, so that's all. Okay.
No, councillor Turnbull was ahead of me on that, so I'm happy to allow her to second.
Well, I actually have Councillor Davis.
Yeah,
Have
you
Councillor
turned it off.
Davis ahead of me there.
So I'll
Head of-
take the honour.
Councillor Turnbull.
This is a classic case. If you snooze, you lose.
It's an unpaid position.
Oh, is it?
So, Councillor Davis, you actually have the name at the top of my list.
I'll move it. I'll second it.
Right, thank you.
Just quickly. It's a very complicated issue, isn't it? I agree. I don't think we should be putting down bitumen if next year or 2 years later we then want to go with permeable paving. It is expensive, but I'd reiterate what Councillor Pickett said in that, I went there on the weekend, or it was on Monday, and there was heaps of families there, heaps of kids, and so if there was going to be any place that we'd want to invest that amount of money, I suppose it would be there. And if we can find a compromise position where we can get the best bang for our buck, then we should have a look at it. Although I think perhaps putting the two road bases together might cause some engineering issues, but that's not my problem. So I'll support the amendment, and I think it's worth spending the time now rather than it'll make it more difficult, I think, for this council to then decide to rip up $74,000 worth of bitumen and then put in permeable paving. So we'd almost be setting back permeable paving for a number of years if we went that way. So it's a good idea to have a look at all of our options.
Councillor Turnbull.
Well, as a daily user of that park, I think there are risks associated with it in its decrepit state. I was going to suggest the same thing. It's half permeable or some permeable up the eastern end where there are lots of trees and tree roots, and you could have asphalt down the other end where there aren't so many. So you've got, both, like Councillor Pickett said, would be quite a sensible way of doing it. But I do think it's becoming quite urgent, because if and whenever it rains, it's a quagmire, and I'm sick of my car going clunk over the edge of this great wadding bit of asphalt when you have to park, and other people, they talk about it too all the time, the rotten car park. So if we could make a decision fairly soon and get going on it, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Councillor Jones.
I'd just like to say that I thought we had a budget process where people are supposed to follow the process and put submissions in, and we shouldn't just be putting in random capital expenditure submissions on the fly, especially for something as expensive as $800,000. Because if we did the whole council with this permeable paving, which of course everyone will then start demanding, it will cost God knows how much. So I'm just against the whole concept, really.
Is there any speak? I don't have any further names.
Can I speak on the amendment?
No. That's correct.
That's correct.
Yep. Are you ready for me to put the amendment then? Amendment. Those are in favour of the amendment, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. And those who are against? Right, the amendment is carried. Now, do we have to do anything else? We have to put the motion as amended. Now I'll put the motion as amended. Those who are in favour... no, sorry, now you get... Sorry, Councillor Day.
Thank you, Your Worship.
I assume there's no anyone else wishes to speak. Not everybody has spoken. So I'll just give you opportunity. Councillor Carbone.
Am I speaking or?
Sorry, Your Worship. I just wanted to add my little bit to it. Look, Hazelwood Park, I think always has been and probably always will be, the centrepiece in Burnside when it comes to our parks and gardens. It's not just another park, it's not just another garden, it's not just another group of trees and so forth. It is, like I said, the centrepiece. It's our parade, it's our Victoria Square and so forth. So I think, yes, it is a lot of money, but if we can't spend $800,000 on our centrepiece in Burnside, then what can we spend it on? And
now, and last chance, if anyone else wishes to speak. I think everybody has at this point. No, Councillor Dawes hasn't, but right. So back to Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you all for your comments, and particularly Councillor Carboni putting everything in perspective. I hope everyone has had an opportunity to visit Hazelwood Park and view the internal car park. It is drastically in need of work. Well, it is in need of some work, I won't say drastically, but the problem is the trees around it, which are dependent on water, and certainly rainwater only. They get no other water. It's the only section of Hazelwood Park that doesn't get any supplementary water. It misses out on all of the other grass watering and everything. There are quite a lot of trees there, and I don't think in this day and age we can justify spending $74,000 to just top up the roadway with asphalt when we now have the knowledge and the opportunity to install proper environmental measures in the car park. As we outline in our strategic plan, for our optimal is water sensitive urban design, and I believe we can demonstrate our environmental credentials in replacing and redesigning this car park as we have already agreed and our community has asked for in the Conservation Management Plan. So, as Councillor Hughes has pointed out, we also need to ameliorate issues like heat bank and the huge volumes of heat that are being generated in our hot summers. I'm not sure about the technical aspects of permeable paving and permeable asphalt, but all I'm asking is that we explore those and cost them. And I also think we should keep in perspective whether it's 75,000K or 700,000K. We're actually in the long run trying to save money and energy by having a decent system in place to look after this section of the park. And I'll also point out that only last meeting we voted for a report just like that to spend $200,000 on a toilet in a remote car park in Burnside. We considered that was a reasonable investment. It was something we had to do. We've asked for a report, and that's $200K. So I think we need to keep in perspective what this entails. So it's an iconic park. It is utilised by hundreds of thousands of people per year, and we need to have the optimal environmental design for this area to preserve our trees, if nothing else. Thank you.
Those who are in favour of the motion, please raise your hand. Carried. Now we have 10.4 on page 21, the Regal Theatre property fencing. Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Your Worship. My next motion is about the Regal Theatre property fencing, and I just want have a couple of amendments to the motion. Sorry, I've got my right glasses on. It is that a report be brought to Council addressing that the old fencing at the street frontage at 37 May Terrace, Kensington Park, on Council's property adjacent to the Regal Theatre, be replaced with appropriate fencing that maintains the streetscape and character of the property and the existing homes in May Terrace, Kensington Park. and that any further work on fencing the house be placed on hold until this matter is resolved. Thanks. So in moving this motion, pardon me, it's become apparent that I've actually given you all a photo so that you've got before you the little house, which is at the almost Kensington Road end of May Terrace. And it's previously been fenced with that horrible old Colorbond, derelict sort of utilitarian stuff, as it was essentially being used as a depot, or I don't know what it was being used for. The locals aren't very happy, and they would rather that the facade in the front of the house at least be fenced so that it's similar to their properties, which are all, there's a whole street full of beautifully maintained character homes, and this area is totally out of character. The staff have done a great job. They're already re-fencing the car park area because the whole fencing was derelict. But the area needs just to be in more harmony with its environment and less utilitarian. I guess that's the aim of my motion. The other issue which really brought it home to me was when a few weeks ago I was in the Supreme Court listening to the appeal against the on the run, and the judge was asking questions about the amenity of the area and what it looked like. And someone said, one of the legal team, that it was just a sort of utilitarian end of May Terrace and that it wasn't anything special. And this is when we're talking about opposing, a really huge on-the-run development on the corner. So that filled me with dismay, to be honest, that they would say that. And I just think we need to smarten it up a little bit. It won't cost the earth, but and revegetate it and re-landscape it so that it looks a lot softer and in keeping with the rest of the streetscape in this lovely area. Thanks.
Before I seek a second, I'll just change that to number 39, May Terrace. The house, it's number 39. We won't bother to squabble about it. I'm informed by the council, that administration, that it is definitely 39. So now, do we have a seconder, please? Councillor Turnbull?
I went and visited it too, and the fence, the steel structure going along the side is bang up against a tree. So within 12 months, that fence will buckle because there's no room at all for that tree to grow. So it's been put up in a hurry. They're tin, it's not colourblind on the front, it's tin. The tin looks awful and really needs to be updated and made like the houses on the other side, which are lovely black wrought iron and green wrought iron. Just looks more heritage looking than tin. So I would support this motion.
Through the chair, in late 2018 we became aware that there were the fences alongside 39 Main Terrace were falling over. So they were old corrugated iron fence. There was an old corrugated iron fence that ran along both sides of the property and a little section in front of the sort of the driveway area. So we tendered work to replace that with Colorbond post and rail fencing, which is effectively a modern equivalent of what's there. That's in line with the principles in our asset management plans, which say we'll effectively replace like for like. So that work's been tendered. The works to replace the fencing down both sides has been substantially completed. There's a small section in front of the sort of driveway area that's due to be completed next week. They're just manufacturing the gates for that section offside. I'll note as well there's not currently any fence in front of the actual house itself, and there's no intention to put any Colorbond fence in front of the house itself at this stage either.
Just ask the question, there's part of the intention was there's no budget allocation for a fence in front of 39 May Terrace, the house itself at this point?
Through the chair, there's not been any budget allocated to it, but there was also no fence there. Well, certainly not in recent times either. So that's all open still.
So any discussion about a fence to go there, appropriate type of fence, would come into the next budget consideration? Just asking that question.
Through the chair, it could. However, having said that, at the moment, point 2 says that any further work is placed on hold. So the work that we've already tendered and have contracted to do would not continue at this point in time if this resolution went through as is.
Is this the area in front of the top block or the house itself? I understood that the fence that is currently being erected has gone on one side, backing onto the hula hoops of the garden area there. That's been completed. And this afternoon, because I went there this afternoon to have another look, and the other side, parallel with that, is also nearly completed. I understand there's supposed to be a similar colour-bond fence across the front of that kind of dead car parky area.
Mm-hmm.
And this motion would stop that from going ahead. Is that correct?
Through the chair, at the moment, yes, this motion would stop that, but it would also, the fencing down the north side, so in between the Regal car park and the car parky area of 39 May Terrace, the fence is up, but there's still a little bit of work to do the capping. There's a bit of backfill underneath. At the moment, this would stop all of that work as well.
Thank you. Councillor Piggott.
Thank you. At the risk of answering the same questions again, can I just clarify, the motion, point 1 of the motion anyway, talks about just the street frontage. You're saying that there's been no fence there, there's no intention to put any fence there. Is that fair?
Through the chair, that's right, there's no fence in front of the house at that property, and there's no intention to put any fence at the front of the house on that property at this point in time.
Right, and the motion does talk about the...
Through the Mayor, can I just further expand
Please.
on that? The site is effectively 2 blocks, one with the existing house and the next, which is the car park. But they're 2 blocks. It's effectively a double width block. What was in existence prior to this work commencing was a fence along the car park section of the block, but there was no fence in front of the house section of the block, both on May Terrace, just to be clear. And what's being proposed is to have colour-bond fence replacing the old colour-bond fence along the car park section of the block.
This is the one we're talking about.
This is being replaced with colour-bond.
That's the one we're talking
There's
about.
nothing intended to go there.
Okay. And that's what we're talking about. Yeah? That's consistent with your
Is that
thinking.
the car
It's this
park?
one here. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just
No fence there.
So through the Mayor, it's our intention that our understanding of this motion, that the small portion of colour-bond fence that would sit on the May Terrace frontage of the car park would not go ahead, and that there would be a continuous fence along the entire frontage, including the dwelling and the car park, of a nature that is as determined by the Conservation Management.
Subject to a report. Right, yeah. Okay. Do you know, I think we need a report. Actually, I'm going to speak to this. I mean, it's one of those things that we can spend a lot of time on, and people will make fun of us, I guess. But it is an important area, and Tim's already doing it. And so I think we probably do need a report, so we do know what we're talking about, what it is going to cost to sort out on a more permanent and perhaps more consistent with the street basis. And so I'm happy to support the motion.
Can I just add that what was explained to me today by the fencers was that the colour-bond fence was planned to be continued to finish off along the side on the northern side, which separates the existing car park from the two properties on May Terrace. They're about halfway finished with that, putting the colour bond up. They told me that across the front of that car park area, which is actually just a dead gravelly area, dirt area, that would have also, or was planned to have a colour bond fence with double gates in there as well, which would allow vehicles to park within that space. So if they're mucking in sent to the theatre to do a live show, for example, then they would have that kind of reserved car parking space to park within that area without having to try to park out into the normal car park. So the idea was to have that fence, the colour bond fence, go right around that dirt patch, semi-car park, although it's not officially a car park, the empty block. And then what I was told today, there was no plan to have any fence in front of the actual house itself, because it's a long, long time since there was a fence. There's no budget being allocated for such a fence, and no design created for a fence in front of the house. But the colour bond fence was planned to be continued around in front of the dirt paddock. So that would actually make that area less unsightly, potentially allow vehicles to be parked in there when they're moving in for a theatre production, as they're going to be doing on Saturday night, and then they would be able to park their cars safely in there, offload their gear, and the gates would be closed behind. So there's two different pieces of fencing we're really talking about that are hidden in this motion.
Crushed rubble.
Back to you. Who's next? I'll stop talking.
Councillor Hughes.
I was just going to propose an amendment, then perhaps that point 2 should read that any further work on fencing in front of the house be placed on hold, so that section of fence that has commenced on the street frontage.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
And then that way the section that has been commenced can be completed, but we can have a report on a fence in front of the property. Correct. That would be my amendment.
I do see the point that Councillor Davey is making about making that particular fence fit in with the nature of the houses across the road and in the street. So that's not the problem, but it's being confused with the other aspect of the fencing.
Numerous other
so I think by
components of
adding that, if Councillor Davey's happy to accept that, rather than make yet another amendment.
Happy to.
Are you able to accept that? And who was the seconder? Councillor Turnbull, you happy with that as well? So we just allowed that to be part of the original motion rather than the amendment.
Could I just clarify that it currently says front of house, street frontage in brackets. They are not the same thing. It needs to be street frontage.
Same thing.
Because it goes beyond the house, the street frontage.
The street frontage in front of the house. I think probably if you just removed street frontage altogether, it might make more sense.
Well, I didn't know anything about this car park.
Yeah, there's a car park. In those other photos that I took today, you can see. You should be able to see.
Those two bits there. Can we just say fencing on the May Terrace frontage?
Yeah, if we just said, if we actually just said on the 39 May Terrace frontage, it would make it clear.
Yep.
On the 39 May Terrace frontage in number 2, okay?
Thank you.
So that any further work on fencing the 39 May Terrace frontage of the house, you take that out, frontage, be placed on hold until the matter is resolved.
Sounds good.
Which is fine because nothing was intended to go there anyway.
What's being resolved?
At this stage.
Should we just...
Never asked for a report about what to put.
Isn't the answer nothing?
No.
Okay. Now, Councillor Davis, you're next on the list.
I'm very confused. I'll
I don't have anyone else here mentioned on my list, so are you happy for me to put it back to Councillor Davey?
Thank you, Worship. Thank you everyone for your help in rectifying this issue. All we want is to make the area more livable, certainly usable because it's valuable council property, and I think it's used in association with the theatre, and it's also utilised by the lessees of the hula hoop, I believe. But it just needs to look a lot better, and I think colour bond is really utilitarian. I hope we can do a little bit better. I didn't know anything about the house being used for car parking till now, but other than for the normal deliveries that are being made there. But yes, I'd be grateful if you could support this so we could get a report and then we can get all our facts straight. Thanks.
Right, those who are in favour of the motion as it stands, please raise your hand. Those against, I think that was unanimous. Now we will move on to 10.5, page 23, and it's Councillor Henschke.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm moving a motion that the Council Administration write to Mark Parnell, MLC, the Honourable Stephen Marshall MP, Peter Malinauskas MP and Vicky Chapman MP to support the Planning, Development and Infrastructure Code Amendments, Amendment Bill 2019, that was introduced by Mark Parnell, MLC. So thank you everyone. All we want, I just heard from Councillor Davies, is to protect our heritage and character. So thank you, it was a nice way to start talking about this motion. We represent residents and ratepayers of a city of Burnside. Look, I don't have to, you know that there are thousands of contributory items. Now, you may not have experience with contributory items, you know what local heritage is or state heritage. Contributory items are those houses that some people think might belong in L&B Gardens. I've heard an architect say that about my house, actually. Houses that belong in L&B Gardens, those State Bank bungalows, those gentleman bungalows. Yeah, there are lots of them in L&B Gardens, and there are lots and lots of them in the Rose Park Terrace Gardens ward. In fact, I had a meeting with the National Trust, the CEO of the National Trust, and he showed me a map. This map was bright blue, right through the Rose Park Terrace Gardens ward. And in the council area of Julian and Councillor Helga Lemon and Julia Carboni, they are scattered through there. We have strips of state heritage, of course, but these contributory items are under threat. Now, years ago when the Planning, Development and Infrastructure Act was promulgated, there was a clause that Mark Parnell proposes in this amendment bill to remove. It's a simple clause. It just simply makes it much easier for these contributory items to be protected. Or I think I'll just focus on the principle because I don't want to get into legislation, and I know Councillor Davis may want to challenge me more on this, but simply it's a principle, the principle to protect our local historic character. I urge the elected members to support this motion for the administration to write a simple letter of support for this amendment bill. Thank you.
Councillor Davis.
Yeah, I'll second it. I'm not sure what people think of me.
Does she?
No, so actually, yeah, why wouldn't I support it? I actually spoke with Mr. Mark Parnell today. I invited him along to tonight's council meeting, in fact, and I had a good discussion with him about this particular motion. And it made a lot of sense to me. So my understanding is that there was a motion passed, or a bill passed quite some years ago, which was never implemented and was never given a sanction. So there's currently a bill that was approved but never actually implemented. And the plan is that there's going to be a single system. At the moment we have 68 development plans which cover a whole bunch of, which cover every single council. And the new system, which is be one code or one development plan that would cover everything, and it's going to be introduced in Whoop Whoop first, then the country, and then in the urban areas. And what Mark said to me was the problem is that this would be considered an amendment, and so that possibly, in his view of it, his understanding of it, is that all of these things, all of these, I think it's even conservation areas, or every one of these contributory items would be up for election, every single one. And they would require 51% of residents' say to pass them or not. And so essentially we'd have a massive election on a grand scale for every single one of these items, which to me just doesn't seem like good policy. And I think that it was, that now with a new system that the government would probably like to reconsider what that would actually mean. And secondly, I think that it really shouldn't be up to local residents to determine what's of heritage value or not. That should really be up to the state on a policy level, and it shouldn't be up to individuals who live within that area. I think these things are far too important to leave it. They have a value for a great number of people, and it shouldn't be a small number of people who get to decide what it would be. And so that's why I support it. And I think that Mr. Parnell is hoping that other councillors will follow a similar suit, and that this seems to be quite an irregularity, I suppose, but actually present quite a significant danger to the current way that we do business. So I'm more than happy to support it. And yeah, why do you think so mean of me?
Well done. Dare I say it? Councillor Lemon.
Yes, thank you. I propose an amendment. So the motion would be that council administration write to Mark Parnell as it stands, but after Peter Malinauskas MP, there's a comma. Then you get rid of the and before Vicky Chapman. After Vicky Chapman MP, you then put and the Honourable Stephen Knoll, Minister of Planning, and then the rest of it. The reason I say that is it's Vicky Chapman is the member for Toorak Gardens, but Stephen Knoll is in fact the Minister for Planning, so he needs to know about this as well, and he needs to know about it not from his colleagues but from us. I'm very happy to support this. Mark Parnell.
Can I just interrupt and just say, happy
Must
for
you?
this? No, I was just going to say, if they're happy, can we, instead of it being an amendment, we just continue, change it?
Sure.
If the others are happy, and then I will invite you to continue.
Well, no, I'm putting, well, they're not, yes, well, we could put all of those in there, but what we've got in is the member for Toorak Gardens, also the Deputy Premier, the Leader of the Opposition, and the Minister for Planning, who is probably the most important. I'm not suggesting that we put the entire Cabinet on a pedestal.
No, I think yours is a very good suggestion,
Thank you.
Councillor Lemon, and that's why I just wanted to suggest that rather than it be amendment, if the mover and seconder are in agreement, we just add the name. I think it's a very sensible addition rather than us going through an amendment. So if you're happy with that...
Clearly, they don't appear to be happy.
Okay.
Yes?
It's good. So I'm sorry
So you
for...
are going to be happy, yeah. Okay, so may I now speak?
Yeah, so...
Yes, well, everybody's honourable. We're
Yes.
all honourable.
Yeah.
One
so
hopes.
please, I'll invite Councillor Lemon, and I apologise for interrupting, but I just thought that would make it easier.
Sorry, can we include David Pisoni?
No, I'm just
No.
going to leave it as these at the moment.
I'm very happy with this because we've got the Minister for Planning, we've got the Minister with the most contributory items. Now, Mark Parnell has been the voice of reason throughout the whole debate on planning and the changes to the planning code. He has been absolutely sensational throughout, very sensible, comes up with really good, picks the holes and the pitfalls in what's being proposed and comes up with really good alternatives. So I'm really, really happy to support this, and I'm especially happy because it does thank him for the work that he does on our behalf. So yes, happy to support.
Councillor Hubel.
Thank you, Worship. I'm very much in support of this motion. Thank you, Councillor Henschke, for putting it forward. Look, contributory items are what make what give a neighbourhood its character, and what make an area what it is to live in. So, I think us as a council publicly making a statement in support of this is very appropriate.
Thank you. Councillor Carbone.
Your Worship, could I make a small amendment to include David Pisoni? We've got the member for Dunstan, we've got the member for Bragg, but the other member of Parliament who always gets forgotten, can we include the member for Unley as well?
Do we have a seconder for that, please? Right, Councillor Jones has seconded it, so the amendment. You wish to speak on the amendment? On that, Councillor Jones?
But I think for completeness, we should add and for completeness, I support we should add the member for Hartley because he also covers part of Burnside. And he'd be upset if we leave him out.
Is this?
It's yesterday's news.
Look, I think I'd like to defer to Councillor Henschke because the purpose of this, I understand, was to hit the person who is making the amendment, the Leader of the Opposition and the Premier, and Vicky Chapman, the MP, our Attorney General. The addition of Honourable Stephen Knoll, I think, is a very valuable addition to that list. But do we want to be writing to every elected, every representative? The answer, I think, is no. I think the issue is these are the big, powerful people who are going to. But I'm influencing. I will be quiet, but I'll leave it to the vote to be the way it goes. So, is there anyone else who wishes to speak? We're including Councillor Carbone, Councillor Jones's addition to the amendment. All right, so I will.
We can't add to an amendment. So, Councillor Carbone moved an amendment.
Yes.
And Councillor Jones seconded it. We can't then add to the amendment.
Is that correct? That's correct. Okay. So therefore, we can only include one of those in the amendment. Right. So we can only include the one that Councillor Carbone included in the amendment. Which so I will. Since there doesn't seem to be anyone else here, I will put the amendment. So those who are in favour of the amendment, that is the addition of David Pisoni, please. Right, 1, 2, 3. Oh, well, here we go. We've changed. Lots of people changed their minds. Okay, and those again. Carried. So we are including that one, and now the amendment becomes the motion, and it will go back to Councillor Henschke to sum up.
Unless someone wants to move an amendment to put Vinci.
Well, what can I say? It's going to be an interesting letter. So, all right. Well, yeah. So thank you all. Look, we're really doing something good for the residents and ratepayers who, this is front of mind for them, who will feel the effects of this amendment bill. It's a great thing that you're all doing. And without further ado, I think that's all I really do need to say. I spoke to Mark Parnell myself as well, and he did say actually he's writing to all the councils as well, and so he was pleased that Burnside councillor contacted him just ahead of time, if you like. So it's a good signal for our council, I believe, that this is front of mind for our residents and ratepayers. Thank you.
Those in favour? Those against? No, unanimously carried. I'd like a motion now for a 10-minute break. Councillor Lemon?
May I just say, would you consider just going to questions without notice prior to breaking, please?
That's up to Thank you, Councillor Davey. A 10-minute break. Seconder, please. Councillor Dawes. And those in favour? Against? Carry. Resume at 10 past. All right, we have to have a motion to resume, please. Councillor Piggott, Councillor Dawes. All in favour? Against? Carried. Questions without notice. Councillor Hughes, I believe you have.
Yes, I have a question. On the 22nd of February, a large gum outside 18 Russell Avenue, Hazelwood Park, dropped a large limb. I'm just wondering if staff could please advise the estimated age of the tree, the work undertaken by the arborist following the limb falling, and if the tree is being removed, why this is the case, and are there any other alternatives to removing the tree?
Before CEO answers, I just wanted to say I appreciate getting those questions in advance, because it means that the CEO's had time to actually get the answers rather than, jumping on us and anonymously without any time for preparation. So thank you.
Through the Mayor, the tree is 200 plus years old. The work undertaken by the arborist included a tree assessment, including an aerial inspection, termite inspection and treatment, arranging and supervising tree climbing contractors to undertake a 30% crown reduction, which was targeted following the aerial inspection. The tree is not being removed. The 30% crown reduction will enable the tree to regenerate and remain healthy. The major work undertaken on the tree will, for a while, look severe, but it should regrow. The condition of the tree will be monitored by the council's arborists.
What good news. I watched them up there in their harnesses doing their pruning. Now, Councillor Lemon.
Yes, I have a question without notice. Did you know, Mayor Burnside, that Peter Cornish, who is currently in Essex in England, is watching us tonight at this very moment? And I think we should send him greetings, because I see this as part of our international quest to truly become the Kardashian of councils. So, hi Peter!
And Councillor Davis is not here to hear you say that. All right, we will move on to... Oh, sorry, Councillor.
That's okay, but could I say, if I had known that Councillor Cornish would spend his time overseas watching this live streaming, I wouldn't have voted for his leave of absence.
Yeah, my answer would have been get alive. Through the reports from officers, asking if you indicate... oh, sorry, motions without notice. I did read it actually out and then forgot Councillor Piggott. So there are no motions on notice, so I'm moving on. Without notice, I should say. So now reports of officers. 13.1, please indicate if you wish to withdraw it for debate. No? 13.2, Delbridge Court, Beaumont. Councillor Jones. I was going to Councillor Councillor Harvey I was going to write down. So Councillor Jones. Okay, records management policy. Councillor Lemon. Verge development policy. Councillor Piggott. Hire of community open space and facilities policy. No one? Arts, culture, heritage and recreation policy. Councillor Davey. That's it. So we go back to the first one that was not withdrawn. Those was a mover, please. Councillor Piggott. Seconder. Councillor Lemon. Oh, Hugh. Which one? Councillor Lemon. All right. Those in favour. Those against. Councillor Jones. In favour. All right. So that was unanimous. Carried unanimously. Councillor Jones, you wish to oh, sorry, no, there's another one. 13.5. A mover, Councillor Davis. Seconder, Councillor Hughes. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Right, now we go back to 13.2, Councillor Jones.
I'd like to change this report, if I could please, of the motion. So I'm happy with 1.
Read it.
Number 2, after that council, insert the words does not. Delete 3. Delete 4. Yeah, this might be a common theme with me, but I'm kind of getting annoyed with people who sign up to agreements, don't stick to them, and then some years later say, oh, I've killed all the trees, can you just cancel the agreement? It's an outrage. The council themselves, the administration have said, they haven't stuck to the agreement. And I just don't think we should let them get away with it. The agreement says if the trees are dead, they have to replace them. So really, I've just got no sympathy for them, and I'm just going to move the amendment as it is.
Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor.
I fully agree with Councillor Jones' comments. I don't think they should benefit from their neglect. Let's put it that way.
Councillor Piggott. Sorry. Apologies. Councillor Davis is first.
From a legal perspective, how does the council sit on this motion?
Through the chair, the council is perfectly entitled to take that position. It may create some difficulties in developing 1 or 2 of those blocks, but the council is not required to consent to the removal of the LMA.
Okay.
Now, Councillor Piggott.
A question. Is your understanding of what the resident in this case has done in regard to this land management agreement consistent with Councillor Jones's, albeit quite concise, description of it?
Through the chair, the LMA comes in 2 parts. It seeks to do 2 things. One is to keep and preserve existing stand of trees. Those trees are still there. But the other thing that the LMA required to happen in 2007 was the planting of some new trees along the eastern border of the site, and that hasn't happened.
It has happened.
Hasn't.
Oh.
So the existing trees are still there, but the new ones that are supposed to be there are not.
And is there any benefit in getting those trees now?
Through the chair, well, there's always a benefit. What it would do, though, is put us in a direct conflict with what we think the developer's trying to do, which is to build a new road curving around from the existing road up along the eastern boundary to afford access to the allotments from the top rather than the bottom. Those easternmost allotments, the ones between the road and the eastern boundary.
And is there any benefit to having the resident plant trees anywhere else?
Through the chair, that would always be beneficial if a suitable spot could be found.
And do you think a suitable spot could be found?
It's a difficult site. I'd want to take some people who know more about trees than me to advise on that, but the site's topographically challenging. So it's not all, I couldn't guarantee there'd be places where trees could be planted, but we could certainly look into it.
Thank you.
Councillor Hubel.
Yes, some questions as well, Mr Hundrick. Thank you. My understanding of the LMA was primarily that it was to preserve the remnant trees at the eastern side of the Lamb Division, which is up the top. and to establish new landscaping along the eastern boundary. Is that accurate?
Through the chair, yes, it is.
Yep, great. I'm a little bit confused, but the report recommends getting out of this arrangement. Could you give some more insight as to why, administration thinks that is the way we should go?
Through the chair, it's really about what's happened in the last 10 or so years. If I can turn to the page in the LMA which shows the trees, which is page 64 in the agenda papers.
Yep.
That page shows the trees as they existed in the context at the time. So in the context of those big long allotments. What's happened since then, I think probably around 2007, is another land division was approved, and the best way to describe that is to go to page 47.
47 now.
47, that's the one where there's a little bit of an image that's
coloured image.
Yeah, so if you compare that image to it's a bit hard, but compare that image to the original LMA, it shows a new road that sort of punctuates into the middle of the previous allotments and creates smaller allotments either side of that road. So while the keeping of those trees was a reasonably practical outcome when the LMA was first entered into, that new land division kind of makes it a bit harder and less practical to find a spot to build houses on those two allotments. I think they're 35 and 37. Even our arborist has said that those trees would likely not survive long once those allotments are developed. So it's recognising the practicalities and what's happened over time.
Okay, so that road, which is a new road, and I know the area, I know these allotments. When that, I assume, went through planning approval for build. Is that right?
Through the chair, the land division there would have been a process. Yes.
Was this LMA discussed at that stage? I know this is years before I've become involved, so it's I'm looking for a bit of a historical context here, so I appreciate the replies.
Through the chair, I'd probably need to take that on notice and may never be able to answer the question. We're as we speak, for different reasons, we're trying to pull all the files from archives in relation to this land division so we can get a handle on what's happened. Not necessarily in relation to the trees, but that would be a byproduct. So at this stage, I couldn't say what discussions were had.
That's fine, thanks. I guess I'm just trying to get my head around, if we do revoke this or we don't revoke this, what does that mean for the development of the land? My viewing of this, I guess that's questions, I'll speak to this now. Yeah, so my view on this is that originally when this whole area was designated to the allotments, that the tree line along that eastern boundary, the LMA was created to protect the tree line. That tree line, it seems, has not been protected through various reasons. I'm not putting that blame on anyone. But it seems that the new subdivision has more or less led to the situation where having trees up on that eastern boundary is no longer applicable. So my viewing of this is that dividing those long blocks, splitting them with the new road, has meant that having the trees up on the eastern boundary isn't really applicable because that interferes with building on those higher blocks, 31, 33, 35, 37, 39. Now I go back to the original LMA and I think, well, the preservation of the trees in that area is something that was important to the council at the time. And my understanding is that it's still something that's very important to this current council. So I'm very loath to say, don't worry about the trees. If they die during construction, that's okay, which is what I feel us rescinding this LMA would lead to. So I feel we need to hold the people involved here to the LMA, and that's saying that we need to, we require them to have replacement of trees that get damaged up the top there. So.
Councillor Hench.
Thank you, Councillor Hubel. I and Councillor Jones for the expedient adjustment to the motion. Fast. Right, well, this is a really interesting area, and councillors, what they do in Victoria, and this is something we may want to consider, and I'm going to get to a question to the administration, but okay, I'll go for the question first. How many hectares of trees, roughly, are we talking about here that this developer wants to remove? 100 metres by 100 metres, 1 hectare worth, 2 hectares worth?
Through the chair, not that many. There's essentially, the arborist reported back that there are 6 trees.
Pardon? 6 trees?
6 trees.
All right, so maybe half an acre or whatever. Okay, and how many blocks of land is the developer going to achieve? Is it 31 through to 39?
Through the chair, blocks 35 and 37 as shown on page 47.
Right, thank you. So
2 allotments.
Two allotments, thank you. So, okay, something we don't do in South Australia but is done in Victoria, and it is for where landowners can apply to have trees removed, but they pay. So, per hectare of native vegetation considered lost or removed is $95,000. Scattered tree, 12,000. Grass, on it goes. There's a whole list here of fee types for developers wanting to specifically subdivide their land. But we haven't got this provision in place in South Australia. Is it possible that the administration, that we have a policy for division, so we can, if this is going to create revenue for the council, in additional rates for blocks of land, at least we can recoup some fees for removal of trees. Seems to be a model that's working in Victoria. We have? Right.
So what's your question?
So,
is there a question?
I think I can cobble an answer.
Okay.
I think I've got the question.
Okay.
Through you, through the chair, this in part is a potentially, it's either going to be 0 or it's going to be a 2-layered thing. So the first decision council needs to make, and this is what the council will do tonight, is decide whether to rescind the LMA or not. There's no... Oh.
I'm having trouble. Yes.
The first decision that needs to be made is whether or not the LMA will be rescinded, and that's for the council to decide. If it doesn't rescind the LMA, then that's it. If it does, in relation to the 2 regulated trees, there's another process that we need to go through, which would be a planning application to damage those trees by removing them. And there's a small cost to the developer associated with that. The developer would either have to pay into our tree fund, about $6,000, or plant replacement trees. So there's either a tree cost or a financial cost. It's probably not to the same level that the interstate examples lead to, but it's all we've got for now.
I have a question. She's too busy bloody talking.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Worship. Through the Chair, under the tree valuation formula, what is the value of these trees, please? We've got a tree valuation formula that we adopted, and it doesn't look like it's
Through the Chair, that is something I do not know. I could find out, but I'd have to take that on notice. We'll take it on notice.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lemon.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions too. This original agreement was executed in 2006, according to this report. So we're talking 13 years ago. Are we still dealing with the same developers? Or have they morphed into some other form of developers? I'd just like to know if it's the same firm that did it 13 years ago.
Through the Chair, it's the same firm.
So my understanding of reading this is that there's only 3 blocks being developed and they're the ones with the trees. Is that so?
Through the Chair, no. None of those blocks highlighted in yellow have been developed yet. It's principally the ones on the western side of the division, on the west of Delbridge Court.
So are they the first, is that the first development on this site in 13 years?
Through the Chair, that land division which created that other road has changed the amount of allotments. What the developer is now in the process of trying to do is to, because of the topography, to create access to those highlighted allotments from that road, which is the extension of Delbridge Court, would create the requirement for a large amount of cut and fill. So to counter that, we think what the developer is trying to do is to extend that road and loop it around so it runs along the eastern boundary of the site to afford access to those allotments from the top rather than the bottom. That's the process.
So would I be correct then in saying that that effectively doubles the, it adds significantly to the a number of allotments that could have construction on them?
Oh, through the Chair, no, it won't. That process won't add to the number of allotments. It'll just change where those yellow highlighted ones would get their access from.
So the yellow highlighted ones were always going to be built on?
Yes. So bring the road down.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So yes, thank you.
Can I just make a comment here? Because this is an issue that is in my previous ward. I had quite a number of complaints from residents in the houses on that northern side when that roadway or when the excavations began. And I consider this may also, I'm just making a comment as having dealt with complaints from residents on that side, about complaints about the issue of that development, and the removal of trees would add significantly to that particular issue. I'm not trying to persuade anybody, it's a matter of
Were the complaints bona fide? Were they upheld? Were they enforced now?
They were upheld in terms of they had permission to build that road.
So are you saying the complaints were upheld, and are you trying to say the developer acted illegally in some way?
No, of course not.
So then why raise the issue of complaints?
Councillor Davis, I'll remove my comments.
You can't remove them, they're now here.
Ignore them.
What?
It's my turn. Another question, if I could. Is it available to council to say, yeah, okay, we'll tear up the LMA you did in 2006, but there will be a fee of $20,000 to do it? Like, not a nominal fee, a chunk of money that perhaps reflects we don't like doing this, but also, yeah, is that available to us? Or is that against the Local Government Act? It's against the Local Government Act, or it's... Well, I guess he's shaking his head either way.
Sorry, he called me mint. Through the Mayor, no, that's not available to us unless it was included in the LMA in the first place, which it isn't. But
And the reason for that is because we are a local government as opposed to a commercial operation who very much, if he wants to change the terms, then we would change the terms. If we're a commercial
through
enterprise.
the Mayor, either party can change the terms subject to consent of the other party. So
That's right, but I'm just asking for a compensation for changing.
The reason there's no compensation included in land management agreements is because it's fundamentally about management of the land. It's not about commercial benefit from one party or another doing something or not doing something. It's the purpose of the LMA is to preserve something. And in this instance, it was the preservation of trees and planting of more trees. Sometimes it relates to physical property. Sometimes it relates to the actual management of land. So it's about an agreement between the council and a landowner about regarding what they want to see happen on a piece of land. For example, we are in a land management agreement situation with Burnside Village regarding a drain that sits underneath the centre, and that's about preserving that drain, making sure that the water from the upper reaches of Burnside get down to the ocean, and we have to have an agreement because that drain runs through private property. So that's the purpose of it. But as Magda said earlier, the only control we have in relation to this, if the land management agreement is dispensed with, is the two regulated trees, and Councillor Davies' suggestion about using the tree formula could be used there, or alternatively it could be the tree fund application as well.
But again, with the development, if they choose development, they'll either get permission or they won't get permission. There won't be a sort of a price to be paid to get permission either. That'd be fair to say.
Through the Mayor, there would be a price to pay if they sought removal of the two regulated trees, yes.
But a nominal price. Yeah,
But
fair enough.
at the prices...
Understand. Regrettable, but I accept the answer. Perhaps if I could speak to it. I think there's all sorts of issues around the edges here. That we've got apparent complaints of neighbours to the area. We've got a developer who's been involved for 13 years and not got on with it. We've got a land management agreement that partly has been abided by and the other part wasn't. Council hasn't enforced the bit that they could have. But I think we sit here in reality with 6 trees that actually aren't worth very much. If you go to page 47, there's 6 trees, one's dead, 3 are not regulated, and 2 are regulated and subject to the Development Act. So in practical terms, what we are really arguing over, apart from the rights and wrongs of whether they've done the right thing with an agreement we made in 2006, or whether they're nice people to deal with, or what the neighbours feel about it, apart from all those things, which actually I don't think should come into play, I think we should look at what we're doing here. If we knock this back, it does effectively, if not stop, certainly change the potential for putting residents into the city of Burnside into those developed blocks. And the price we are paying tonight is actually only 6 trees, 1 dead, 3 not regulated, and 2 subject to the Development Act. And I feel from a practical point of view, and I think we should be practical, land management, I think the CEO's answer to me sort of shows how hard these things are to actually, you put them in good faith. They are actually really hard to enforce. There's not much that happens if you don't do it. It's a frustrating situation. I agree with Councillor Jones on that point. So this is not a new situation in terms of dealing with agreements like this. We need to look at the practicalities. And the practicalities are here, actually, we could do, I think, and probably the neighbours could as well, having this court sorted out, actually moved on to the next phase where there are people living there, enjoying the city of Burnside. And what we need to give up tonight to allow that to happen is 6 trees, 1 dead, 3 not regulated, and 2 subject to the Development Act. And trees are an emotive thing, and that's good. That's part of what we are. We've got a conversation around the canopy coming later in the year, and that's crucial to work at that level. But when you really fire down into look at this thing under the microscope, I actually don't think that it's right to actually put a hold on developing this area because of those 6 trees. I think it's right to put all sorts of things in around, you know, making sure that trees as a policy we look after. But in this specific issue, the one we're looking at tonight, I think it would be wrong to actually put our foot on it to save the trees as they are described. And so I feel actually we should go with the officer's recommendation. I would really like to send the resident a bill, really like that. I think that would have been a really neat solution because it would have given a message and also give us a bit of cash to perhaps plant some trees in a useful place. But it's not available to us. So I feel that what we really should do is actually overturn this and go with the officer's recommendation. I think we should do that.
Councillor Hughes. No, sorry, Councillor Davis.
Close. I had a question of the administration, through your worship. Can you tell us a little bit more about those trees, and in particular 15.4, which says the administration does not foresee these trees as having a long useful life expectancy?
Through the chair, that was a direct quote from our arborist. So that paragraph 15 is essentially our arborist's report. It's fair to say that our arborists are always keen to find ways to keep trees.
Yep.
But the comment there is that it's really about the trees being ultimately in close proximity to new development, which would impact on root zones and the ability for the trees to flourish. So the comment there is really about the trees are okay now, but it's likely if the land's developed in a similar way to other blocks being developed, that the trees won't survive very long.
Right. So, but you're saying that apart from the one that's dead, that they're all fine? Because that's not what I kind of read.
Through the chair at the moment, that's correct. There's
Right.
one that's dead. The other ones are healthy as we speak.
Okay.
But development is likely to change that.
Okay. I'll speak to it. So this occurred a number of years ago, many years ago. And this management has been in place for almost over a decade, I think. I guess the question for council is, how long do you intend to enforce this? From December 2006, what year? Is that infinitely, I suppose? You would never ever give a variation. Is that what the council is saying tonight? You'd never ever give a variation where their plan for development has occurred because they entered into an agreement and those plans have changed. I'm not so stringent in my view of holding someone to an agreement indefinitely when they consider there's better use of the land. I think people should be very cautious in terms of eliciting wrongdoing on behalf of the developer, such as by saying they potentially let one die or saying that there were a number of complaints about them. In my view, they're the developer, they own that land, and they should be able to use it and develop it because that's what it's for. It's not in a natural reserve or anything like that, it's used for development. And that's what we have in suburbia is development. That's what we do, it's where we live. So in my view, holding on to something which is now 13 years old, from 2006 to now, I think is quite redundant, and certainly plans change over time. Now that we have a vacant, we say that vacant land as a council, the current position is that vacant land is a bad thing. And this land has gone undeveloped for 13 years. Is that right? Yeah, since 2006. And so in my view, we should allow it to go through and we should rescind it because I don't think that we don't have any capacity to find them or essentially hold them to wrongdoing. And there has been no charge of wrongdoing in these circumstances. And it just seems like a reasonable thing for someone to do. I think to hold them, they have three trees on their property which aren't regulated or significant trees. they're just normal trees like the one I would have in my backyard or any of you would have in your backyard, if it's negatively impacting on you, then it's up to you to choose to take it down if that's your choice. Now, as I've said before, a tree canopy is important, but I don't think enforcing it by means of this after so many years and being so stringent is really equitable. And I think holding someone to a plan that they've done so many years ago, I just don't think is equitable. So I think that we should vote this motion down and go with the officer's recommendation, because I think that that's what somebody who's rational in this circumstance would do. I think it is quite an emotive argument to talk about, well, we're going to save these 6 trees. Well, at the cost of what? If they continue with the development anyway, they could potentially die. And I think that I think it's a misnomer to start accusing this particular developer or this particular resident, I think they live in our ward, I'm guessing, or in the city of Burnside. Our particular resident is somehow guilty of some wrongdoing, and therefore we should hold them to some higher account. So I think that we should do what's reasonable and allow the rescission, because to me it's outdated and I think times have moved forward. At the moment, the block is what? Have a look at the quality of the block. Is it great? Are we loving that block as it currently is? I'd suggest to you that there's going to be a far better streetscape and canopy that gets put in, and gardens and the maintenance of it would look far better than it does now. So in my view, it's residential land for residential development. So let's let them get on with what it's supposed to be done. It's not a nature reserve. I'd suggest, and I hope that you'd vote this motion down and move with the officer's recommendation, as I think that's the most rational and equitable thing to do.
Councillor Hughes.
My question is, are the developers aware that the trees are regulated? Because based on their email, they say these trees, in my opinion, are not in good health. They are not significant trees. So are they aware that 2 of the trees are regulated anyway? And if we were to rescind this, they would still have obligations in regards to those trees?
Through the chair, I can't be absolutely certain that he knows. So if the council was to rescind the LMA, we would make that perfectly clear, that there's a second process for those 2 regulated trees.
Thank you.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I have a couple more questions through you. What is the role of council in supervising an LMA? What role do we have? Because there's certain conditions that have been laid down in it.
Through the chair, if the LMA was not to be rescinded, then we've got 2 things that we'd need to consider. One is, do we enforce the part of the LMA which requires the new plantings? And we would need to set up a supervisory regime for when development occurs on the 2 blocks, because there's a lot of things in the LMA about what should happen when the blocks are developed. So we would need to consider how we monitored that.
A supplementary question. How come this wasn't done in the last 12 years? No supervision of the existing trees, it seems. Have we only just found out about their state of health?
Well, I think the answer is yes.
And another
through the Mayor, the fact that the 6 trees are still in existence means that there's been no breach of the LMA. I don't think the LMA ever said that council has to ensure that they are perfectly healthy for the duration of their life. It just said that the 6 trees have to remain. They will decline, trees decline, so this is what's happened to some of them. So the LMA didn't put an obligation on either the developer or the council to ensure that the trees stayed alive forever. An impossibility, in fact. So it was about retaining the trees, and this is where we're at the moment. I think the only thing that possibly we could be criticised for is not requiring the additional trees to be planted at this stage.
And one final question. Thank you. Are there any civil remedies available to us? Because I note para 13 on page 58, the governing law is the law governing the interpretation and implementation of the provisions of this deed as the law of South Australia. And then 14, general provisions. If any provision of this deed shall be found by a court of competent jurisdiction to be invalid or unenforceable in law, then in such case the parties hereby recorded his intention that such provision be severed from this deed, and the remaining provisions are to be effective and enforceable according to their terms. What does that mean?
Through the chair, that paragraph 14 seems to be about if there are provisions of the LMA that are unenforceable or redundant for some reason that the court finds them so, then they get severed from the agreement. So that's not really about us enforcing it, that's about what happens if there are, well, provisions that are, as it says, invalid or unenforceable in law. We would take our own advice about if we had to. It's an unusual thing to prosecute a Section 57A LMA, so if it came to that, we'd take our own advice about what the next steps would be.
Councillor Lemon.
Thank you. I thank Councillor Davis and especially Councillor Piggott for their very pragmatic and practical approach to this. When I first read this, I thought, yep, okay, yeah, the administration have actually requested this and I trust them to do the right thing, and I still do. However, having listened to everyone, there are a couple of things that bother me. One is the passage of time ought not give people a benefit. There is a chap that owns a really old store on the corner of Paynham, McGill and Fullerton Road, that the passage of time will eventually make it fall down. And that's what he wants. And it bothers me that nothing can be done about that. And I feel a bit, and I thank Councillor Jones for bringing it up, I feel a bit like that about this a bit. I've got to say, they haven't done anything on this site for 13 years. And now they're here looking to get rid of an impediment for something that they may or may not do. And there's 3 unregulated trees currently under this review. If they don't do anything on this site for another 13 years, those 3 unregulated trees could well be significant, especially if we have a few wet winters. So I actually think I will support. I like to be pragmatic, but in this instance, I will support Councillor Jones on this. I think this is an easy option for them. They haven't come back with very much. They haven't come back with a start date. They've done nothing in 13 years. They've just sat there thinking, oh, we might develop that land one day. Oh, let's see if we can do, oh, we might put another road up here. Property across Australia is tanking. We all know this. In the eastern states, it's seriously tanking. New housing development is tanking across Australia as offshore investment goes back offshore. I don't know that anything's going to happen here for the next 13 years except those trees are going to get knocked down, and I'm not prepared to support that, I'm sorry.
Councillor Henschke.
Thank you, Mayor. Magnus, thank you very much. This block of land, I've looked at it on Google Earth and got a perspective of its topography. It's, you know, we've got a ridge line, we've got First Creek, we have a lot of native vegetation adjacent to it as well. So I'm thinking, or asking actually, was the native vegetation in the context of this block of land part of state parks perhaps? Because it appears that there's a biodiversity, I think they call it a biodiversity corridor, which, and I'm no expert at this, but the land heritage people, they talk about biodiversity corridors so that koalas can move and animals move from one hill to another. And so these trees are all at the top of a hill, and removal of them may well mean removal of their normal passage.
Through the chair, the land directly to the east is owned by the state government. And you can see some of the remnant vegetation on that land. It would appear that the trees on the private land are at one end of the corridor, if you like. So it's probably a cul-de-sac of sorts.
Councillor Davey, you have some more questions? Or
Yes, I just have another question. How can we be advised of the actual, in my reference to the tree valuation formula, how will we be advised of what the value of these trees is?
Or through the chair, I'd need to confer with the arborist. There is a value, there is a formula. I would just need to seek that advice and update the council via an email or info doc.
Thank you.
Right, I have no more names on the screen. Does that mean that I can go back to the original mover and seek a summary? Councillor Jones.
When I started work in the City of London some years ago, there was a saying, and it was dictum meum pactum, which means my word is my bond. It doesn't mean my word is my bond as long as I feel like it. It doesn't mean my word is my bond for 13 years and after that I'll do whatever I like. It's my word is my bond. The landlord, the owner, has not followed the land management agreement. It's disappointing that the council hasn't enforced it, but it's quite clear in the land management agreement the owner has to maintain the trees in good condition at all times. They have to do this extra planting that they haven't done. If a tree dies, they have to replace it. It's not happened. I don't see why we should let them off. So that's the specific. There's also a general principle that if we don't enforce our land management agreement, I don't know how many land management agreements the council has with other people, but everyone who's got one is going to say, this council is weak as custard. And they're just going to say, let's tear it up, guys. Let's completely ignore it. Let's do whatever we want because they're not going to enforce it. It's an absolute disgrace. We should not rescind this land management agreement. Thank you.
Those who are in favour of the motion, please raise your hands. Those against? The motion is carried. Right, we'll now move on to records management, 13.3, page 69, Councillor Lemon.
Sorry.
Thank you. I wasn't going to pick this up this time. To actually make my usual comments about must and should, but one of my co-councillors was incensed by it, and this person, who is currently nameless, may reveal themselves during the course of debate. But what I would actually like to point out is that in terms of updating this particular policy, the main game is the difference between must and should. And I will draw your attention to page, well, on this it says page 8 of 43 or something, but you can't actually see it. It's in the track changes part of the policy. And I'll draw your attention to paragraph 9.1.6.4, immediately after that. What's being changed here is elected members should. It's being changed to must not use personal email addresses and send received emails in the conduct of council business while acting in their capacity as an elected member. And what's been removed is elected members must not. Now, the Ombudsman, you would have read, has sent us a letter saying he disapproves of us using our personal emails. I actually don't use my personal email. I use this stuff, well, not this one, but, you know, the SharePoint, the council email address, and follow, and I'm a firm believer in records management policy, and I'm a firm believer in keeping records. But what I find particularly offensive about this change is the Ombudsman or the Attorney-General or Bruce Lander at ICAC have not said we must not. What they've said is they would prefer us not to. They haven't said we absolutely must never ever do it, and this is the fine that you'll get, or these are the consequences of ever doing it. So by changing this policy, in effect, we are becoming our own oppressors, and that really offends me. If the Ombudsman wants us never to use our own personal addresses, make it so. Don't expect me to agree, and you might agree, I will not agree, to be my own oppressor. So my amendment to this is, in paragraph 9.1.6.5, must will be removed and should will stay as the preamble. And immediately above paragraph 9.1.6.6, elected members must not remains. So that is my amendment to this motion. I hope you support me. It is a philosophical and ideological opposition to something that we are not obliged to do. And as you would all know, 8 new members, our hands are tied pretty much in everything else we do. We are the most regulated body of any elected member body. I'm not going to dash into the arms of oppression, and I hope you actually hold back with me.
Councillor Hubel, you wish to second it?
I would like to second it, including, the amendment. Helga Lemon, I agree, and now, this could be naivety on my reading of the policy, but it seems very prohibitive in terms of receiving communication. My reading of the policy is that we must not send or receive communication. Now, if someone sends me an email to my personal email address, which as a new councillor, I created a Gmail account for the purposes of my campaigning. I made that email very publicly available, and residents have contacted me on that. Now, I can't control how people contact me. We all have public profiles where we're easily Googleable, that we can be found online and we can be contacted in many different ways. Now, my reading of this policy is that if someone sends me a text message on my personal mobile number, which is listed on the council website, by receiving that communication, I'd be in breach of this policy, the way I read it. I would like to see perhaps a clause around 9.1.6 that says the EMs must forward any correspondence to their council accounts and include the group manager, people and innovation for the purpose of sound record keeping if they do receive anything to their private accounts. Like Councillor Lemon, I want to do the right thing, but I look at the reality of the world, and my personal experience so far is that I have received communications and I have forwarded them appropriately. So perhaps, I'm just thinking, sorry, bear with me, I'm just considering the best way to do this. Look, I'm not going to do that on the fly. But yeah, look, I think for the case of, for argument's sake, I'd like to stay with the status quo. But I think there could be a bit more work done with refining this. I do have a question though. Maybe I should have led with that. The report states that there could be legal ramifications for not making this change. Could you go into a bit more detail about what they would be? I mean, if we approve this amended motion, what does that mean for us?
Through the Mayor, thank you for the question. Some of the legal ramifications would be, for example, if there's a freedom of information request and we're unable to recover records that might be within a councillor's private account, that could cause us problems, obviously, under the FOI Act. Another legal ramification would be if records are being destroyed. Another one could be lawsuits if there's things that are, theoretically leaked using private accounts or anything like that. So there's a few in that sense. The maximum penalty under that act is 2 years imprisonment or $10,000 fine under the State Records Act.
Yeah, so I think, I think if we do the wrong thing by the Act, we're in trouble by the Act. But look, I think this, as a City of Burnside policy, I think we need to recognise the reality of life and communication, and we can't always control that. So I'll support the amended motion.
Councillor Davis.
Yeah. We did have this debate a while ago, and I still feel the same. The fact is that we're bound by an act. We have to follow the act, and you can be punished under the act, and you have to do that there. But tonight, if we had have already done this, I would have already been in breach of it, because I just had someone CC my work email to it. And I regularly receive emails during my campaign, because we weren't allowed to use our council email during our campaign. So that's how I went out to my residents, and that's how I door knocked them. That's the email I gave to them. And then every time someone emails me after a campaign, Mr. Lyons says I'm in breach of the act. Well, if we move this, just receiving an email on your other account is a breach. And I don't think that's right. And I also don't think that that's what Mr. Lyons intends. I don't think anybody intends for you to be in breach of an act just because you receive something. What you should then do is what the Act says, is to then forward it. My understanding is that you should then forward it to your council email address, and that automatically gets captured under our records keeping system. But how can you possibly say that you're in breach of the Act if you receive it to your private email address? Because I'd already be guilty of that tonight. So in my view, I think that's right. We shouldn't be making a rod for our own backs, which is near impossible, and it is impossible to follow. Not only that is, my understanding is that I wouldn't be in breach of the Act if I have a private email address, and that's perhaps what I've been conversing with the residents throughout the election campaign, and then if I come into council and continue to use that, but I CC in my council email address, it would still be trapped under the it would still comply with the proper protocol. It would still comply with the Act if I was continually CCing in every response I made from my private email address. The difficulty I have is then telling the resident not to email me on one, and then I start emailing them back on another one. It's just a bit of a nightmare. When it comes to text messages, Facebook messages, Facebook comments, I'd probably suggest that all comes under the Act as well. And that's extremely difficult. How am I meant to go and capture somebody's comment on a Facebook page or private message to me? It's incredibly onerous for councillors to uphold this. I think for text messages, what the council should look at doing is potentially having a number that we can forward all of our text messages to, but that would be an incredible nightmare to catalogue it. And then go through and say, well, this is a message from this person at this time about this issue. And I think cataloguing, you just have thousands of messages which have kind of no relevance. So I think that in a digital age, there needs to be a bit of a rethink here. What if I receive a letter? I mean, the idea is that I should scan it in and then put it into records management. It's a freaking nightmare. How the hell are people who are part-time, we do this, this is definitely relevant.
I didn't ask you.
Oh, well, I'm telling you. That in my view, that this Act is onerous enough, and that we shouldn't go and make it even harder. And I'd also point you to paragraph 4 of Mr. Lyons' letter, And he said that the purpose here is to remind all council members of their obligations under the State Records Act and to encourage councils to take steps to ensure that all council members provided with email addresses. And I think that what the Ombudsman is talking about here is cases where people would genuinely and routinely not use their council email address and essentially completely go outside the system. And I think that is wrong. But we can only do the best we can in complying with this Act. And I think that I would have already been in breach of it tonight if the words were must. And so I definitely would forward, and I try to maintain, and we should always be aware that this Act exists. But at the same time, we can only do the best we can. And I think that making it a must, it's impossible. It's near impossible for us to comply. Making it a should actually makes it possible for us to comply with it. So that's why I'd support Councillor Lemon's amendment.
Councillor Piggott.
Question. Councillor Davis, I feel, has possibly tried to muddy the waters a little bit by mentioning foreign things like Facebook and less foreign things like letters. What is the position in regard to messages through Facebook, for instance?
Through the Mayor, I will also draw your attention to, there's a couple clauses in there, but specifically any official record must be forwarded to the information management team. So yes, that could be a screenshot of an SMS. If it's a hard copy official council business, yes, that is a record of councils. It's not an individual private record. And it's the same with email. Some of the concerns that were addressed earlier, under 9162, if an email is received by a private account, it must be forwarded to the records unit.
Right, so a relatively straightforward rule, if not necessarily that easy to do in practice. Could I, look, I want to speak against doing this. I think the officer's recommendation is almost right. It's not quite right. And there's two issues that have come up here. In the clause that we are fighting about, 9.1.65, does talk about that must not use addresses to send or receive emails. I feel on the receive thing, it is a valid point. It's a difficult thing to manage. Further up, the quote you just gave me, 9162, talks about we must forward official records to the information management team. So if I receive an email on my work email, my situation is that I do occasionally receive them because I did use it during the campaign. I need to forward that straightforward. I can't control whether I can receive it because that's not in my control. I can certainly control whether I put that out there, and I certainly haven't since the campaign, but I can control whether I put it out there, but I can't necessarily control someone accidentally finding me, knowing where I work and knowing or in fact, I might know them through work and have an issue around Burnside. That's happened before. So I feel the word receive in there after the word must is both not necessary and also something that I would find quite hard to do. And we've heard from Councillor Davis he'd be already in breach tonight. And that's the last thing we want to have happen. Thank you. Someone felt the irony.
No, I'm upstage.
The issue around...
I'll drop you into ICAC.
Yeah, got me in.
The issue around send, though, and I've been in this conversation before, or debate before, is it just seems so logical to me that actually we do make it mandatory. Because if you don't make it mandatory, you don't... I mean, it does mean that it leaves it open to allow to do that, which leaves a possibility that we won't get it right. We won't necessarily send it off to official records. We won't necessarily be in the freedom of information request when we should have been. I feel that it is absolutely appropriate to put must. Councillor Lemon's argument appears to be saying to me that the Ombudsman says we can get to this level, so therefore no way are we going to actually do better than that. That's the absolute maximum level because that's what we've been asked for. And I don't think that's the way we should run. I think it is open to potential abuse. It says should and must. Should is quite a weak word. Must is clear. And so I feel that it is the right thing to do as a council to put in must. I think it gets rid of any ambiguity. I don't see it's that hard. I think if someone's come into my work email address and I've responded with my work address, or with my Burnside email, then I think future correspondence is probably going to feed off that. They are going to respond back through it. I don't see that as particularly an issue. I don't see it's a problem that I could say, and I have, you know, please send it through to G. Piggott at Burnside, future correspondence. I don't see that's a difficulty, that you can maintain that correspondence while only using outgoing from Burnside. And I think it's where we actually would put in a rule that we can live by, gets rid of ambiguities, it doesn't run us any risk of legal issues that we've talked about, and it over-delivers on what the Ombudsman has actually asked for. And I don't think there's any rule against over-delivering. He's put it as a minimum. I don't see that we can't put it at a higher level.
Councillor Dawes.
You're one of those.
Not really.
I think it's me. Are we doing the Burnside shuffle again, or?
Yours is still on. It was Councillor Dawes.
Yeah, but then you turned it off. So who?
Turn it off and then on again. That's the problem.
It's still on.
It's not on. It's because he keeps turning it on and off. No, it's because they keep turning it on and off. That's the problem. I'm not doing anything wrong.
Okay, I'm there, Henry. Thank you, Henry.
Yes, don't touch it.
I've lost the next call.
No, you haven't. I've written it down. Okay?
Talk.
Okay, thank you, Helga. But this reminds me of my motion earlier in the evening. I'm kind of supporting Helga, but also I agree what Grant is saying. To me, it's no issue of recording. If someone sent me an email to my Gmail account, I do forward it straight away to my other account. I don't see it as an issue. So that would,
by this policy, you couldn't do that. Receiving it.
oh yeah, but what I'm saying to you is I can straight away. I do it. All right. So I agree that must is the way forward, but I do agree with Helga that it should be should now because it's not in the Act. You know, like I think that's the point for me. But I do understand what Grant is saying here, because if we don't make it must in the future, we won't do it. But I'm just saying, me personally, if I get an email to my personal account because someone's made a mistake, I immediately forward it to mine so it's recorded. So to me, that's easy to do. That's the point I'm making.
Now, Councillor Davis, I am going to put in you next, all right, because there was a mess up there. So you are next, and then it's Councillor Henschke.
Okay. I'd move for an extension of time till 11 o'clock, perhaps. That's...
We don't have to do that for another 10 minutes, but...
Why don't we do that now?
We can do it now then if you've moved it, all right? Seconded by Councillor Davey. The motion is that we move for an extension until 11 o'clock, from 10:30 until 11 o'clock. We're not going to get through the remainder of these within the next 10 minutes, so that seems reasonable. I was going to do that at about 25 past, but that's fine. So do we have the motion is that we extend the meeting until 11 o'clock, or before, if we finish earlier.
Seconded, 11 o'clock.
Seconded, Councillor, I think we already had a seconder. I already had Councillor Davey. I was just I was only repeating the motion because some people didn't understand what the motion was. So we're voting to extend the time for half an hour. Those in favour, raise your hand. Those against? 1, 2, 3. Those against, so we're not going to extend
Correct.
the time, all right?
Cool. So I've got two questions. How does this work? And I suppose maybe this is better for... I'll ask it anyway. How does this work if I'm a candidate during that period? So I received a whole bunch of emails as a candidate because I wasn't allowed to use my council email, even though I was a councillor. Are they now records or are they not?
Through the mayor, you would have been under the caretaker provisions, which meant that any of the requests that you had to go through, you would have forwarded to the chief executive officer to manage during that period. So they would have been a record of council.
Geez, no, because they were... All right, I'll ask that in further detail. My last question is, if I have a private email account, a resident messages me, I respond to them from that private email account. However, I CC in my Burnside Council email address. Is that against the law?
Through the Mayor, that is not against the law.
Okay.
Councillor Henschke, I have already said that she would, interruption there, but
I've got the red. Do you want me to?
Right, quick question, thank you through the chair. Can we get training, please? Because by the sound of it, I'm hearing people don't actually understand even the old policy. So with the new policy, can we have training, please?
Through the Mayor, absolutely.
Procedural motion, formal motion.
Councillor Carbone tells the problem anyway, okay? So the motion is about to be put that the council, no, we're voting that the motion be put first. So those who are in favour of the motion being put, please raise your hands.
What be put?
Yeah, that the motion be put. Those against? Lost. So we will continue the debate. Now, I have Councillor Jones next on my list.
I would like to support Councillor Lemon's motion. I was the person who was incensed by this Orwellian nonsense. Burnside Focus arrived in my letterbox the other day. How to contact your elected members. Beaumont Ward, Harvey Jones, a mobile 0414 595 473. Oh look, that's my personal mobile number. Home 8379 5414. That's my personal home phone number. Are you going to record all these for posterity? What about private meetings with people? I went to someone's house the other day, they wanted a footpath. Am I going to have to take a council chaperone with me to take shorthand notes of what happened? It's absurd. Should is a perfectly good word. We'll try and follow it to the best of our ability. Must is just ludicrous. So I vote in favour of the motion. Or I will be voting in favour of the motion if we get there.
Right, I don't have anyone on the screen now, so can I put it back to Councillor Lemon to summarise, please?
Thank you. Page 2 of the Ombudsman's letter, and I'll just read this out. And it was written a while ago. This is from 2015. Oh, this century and this millennium, which is good. As you may be aware, the use of private email addresses is not, in itself, contrary to the Local Government Act or the State Records Act. However, under the State Records Act, the Council must, it's you that must, not should, you must. You must ensure that official records of enduring evidential or informational value are preserved for future reference. We should. You must. It's not against the Local Government Act, and we need to keep in mind the Local Government Act is likely to undergo transformation in the next 12 months because there is talk about changing it. These things are slow, and this may well come in. It's not there now. Councillor Piggott says, should we do better? Let's rise to the occasion and do. Should we do better? Well, actually, I don't need an imperative to do better. I do better already. I use my council emails, I forward things, I'm very aware of state records. I don't have to be told that I must to do well. I don't have to be told that I must to do better. So this is perfectly adequate and perfectly within the law right now, and for me, it's ideological, and I hope you support it.
Those who are in favour of the motion, please raise your hands, and those who are against, it's carried. Now, since we have about 3 minutes left, I'm not going to progress to any other motions tonight. I would like to, however, introduce Belinda Portelli, who is patiently been sitting over in the back corner over there. She's not going to be able to speak on behalf of arts, culture, heritage, etc. But I just wanted for the new members who have not met Belinda before to actually be able to put a face to her name. Belinda is the person who has replaced Farley Taylor for her accouchement leave period of time. But she's not new to council, has been with us a long time, a few babies ago. All right, so I just wanted to introduce her to you all. And can I just, before I close the meeting, remind you that we do have a workshop next Tuesday night. And there will be an email coming out from Rob in relation to that, just to give you some information about the night. And I believe, I'm of the understanding, I'll get to you in a second, I'm of the understanding that what we did not complete tonight goes to 6 o'clock. No, it doesn't have to go to the agenda.
Agenda items be moved into the next meeting.
That will happen.
Yeah, that will happen. We don't have to have a motion on that. I'm just making sure that this is the right procedure. We've just double checked with our governance officer, and the issue is that they just get moved on. Sorry? They can just be all merged into the next agenda. We don't need a motion on it. Okay?
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yes.
About timetable for workshops that we, as per council resolution.
It's coming. It's coming. It's almost ready to go out, but
Is that this week or?
probably the beginning of next week. But we've got a workshop next week, and that's budget, so we already know what that one's all about. And that's the most urgent. Yeah, it's coming. It's coming. It's coming. All right. Is closed at 10:28 p.m.